My pleasure to welcome everybody here at the Faculty of Political and Social Sciences of Scuola Normale Superiore. I'm Guglielmo Meardi. I'm the local dean for this workshop by the Institute of Advanced Studies Carlo Azeglio Ciampi on the governance of digital platforms and artificial intelligence. The Ciampi Institute is an interdisciplinary advanced studies body within Scuola Normale, which promotes in particular multidisciplinary research on topical issues related to the governance of complex societies today. And I think today is a really good example of where a multidisciplinary approach is particularly useful. It is a complex, emerging topic on which there is still a lot to learn and where there are very different disciplinary perspectives that become complementary for the understanding of the process of digitalization and artificial intelligence in today's society. So we have a contribution from the field of politics, sociology, information science, economics, all that, law and governance in a very dense afternoon. So we have two sessions with a very short break in the middle. But hopefully, we'll keep a good pace and we'll manage to cover most of the topics. The Tour de France will start in Florence in a couple of days, and we'll run at the pace of the Tour de France this afternoon, and we'll run over many miles of research and papers and so on. The first speaker today will be Kathleen Thelen, who is currently a distinguished visiting scholar of the Ciampi Institute. Thank you, Kathleen, for your visit and for being with us this month. She's otherwise a professor at the MIT in Massachusetts. And, she's a very well-known historical institutional contributor to the study of the historical study of institutions, economic institutions, social policies, employment policies, and changes at the intersection between technology, governance, economics, and policy. The title of her presentation is Introduction, so the best thing to introduce this afternoon, and current research teams. Thank you, Kathleen, for opening this session of study and giving us some advice on what the most important themes of research are. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I just want to start by thanking, it's been just a fantastic month getting to know some of you and being able to engage with some of the work that's being done here, which I think is absolutely cutting edge and really, really important. I've learned a lot in the month that I've been here. So Mario asked me to kind of kick off the workshop today, or kick off this discussion with just a few remarks about kind of what we know, but also kind of maybe more importantly, what we kind of need to know about the governance of digital platforms and AI. And it is a super full program. I've had the opportunity to look at some of the slides that are going to be associated with the presentations today. So I'm not going to talk too long. I just want to say a few words about kind of the state of the research, and maybe more point to some of the research frontiers, at least as I see them from my corner of this whole set of questions. So, we have actually quite a lot of work that kind of addresses at a pretty general level the sort of general impact of digital technologies on political economies, in particular, especially on a subject that's close to my heart as a person who studies labor, on employment. We had that whole first wave of research that kind of sketched out some of the broad trends. This includes people like, my colleague at MIT, David Otter, whose work I think has taught us a lot in a general sense about who's winning and losing in this transition as these technologies are getting adopted more widely. A lot about the winners and losers, both at the sectoral level, which sectors are adopting which technologies, how they're getting deployed, but also at the level, of course, of occupations, which kinds of jobs are being eliminated, which kinds of jobs are being created and in more demand. We also have a large, and I think in the meantime pretty vibrant, literature on digital platforms. I've contributed some work in this area that sort of explores, again, at a pretty general level, some of the sources of platform power and the kind of impact that platforms have had, particularly on labor markets. That's, as I say, where a lot of the work that I've been doing in the past kind of fits in. So I think we know a lot. We have a sort of sense of the general landscape. But I would say that a lot of the early work, including my own, has been pitched at a pretty high level of abstraction. And so to me, it seems like there's really a lot of work to be done that is kind of more fine-grained and more differentiated, and in particular looking at how, I'm a political scientist, and so looking at how features of the social and political context really influence the trajectory of technology and technological change, as well as its effects. And honestly, in reading what's been the work that's coming out of this team, this group, I think this is where the Scuola is really pushing the frontier in interesting ways. And so I sort of brainstormed about this, and I came up with 6 sets of kind of research themes, research frontiers, if you will. And by the way, this is not at all exhaustive, but that I thought I would just lay out to sort of frame our discussion for today. And the first thing that I think we've done some work on but need to do more on is just exploring cross-national patterns. So, across all of the advanced economies, all of them are adopting these technologies, of course, but not all countries are deploying even the same technologies, and even when they're the same technologies, they're not always deploying them in the same ways. This is something that I tried to write about a few years ago with an article that tried to distinguish different sort of national technological trajectories in Sweden, the Netherlands, and Germany at the time. But in the meantime, there's other work that I think is really pushing the boundaries here. I would, in particular, cite the work of Niccolò Durazzi, who's going to be a neighbor of yours when he moves to Bologna. He and his colleagues have worked out a far more differentiated index based on several indicators that I think are going to allow us to track in more fine-grained detail cross-national patterns, both in the sort of introduction of new technologies, the pace at which they're being introduced, but also in the cultivation of different skills that are associated with these advanced technologies. And so what I've seen from their work so far is that it's revealing a lot, not just about the kind of rate of change across different economies, but really, and maybe more profoundly and interestingly, differences in the kind of mix of technologies and skills that are featuring more prominently in some economies than others. So just to bring this down from an abstract level, one of the things that they have written about is that, in Germany, Germany's kind of far ahead, actually, by their metrics of the United States in the introduction of industrial robots, and also many of the ahead in the training of certain kinds of skilled technicians associated with advanced manufacturing. But the U.S., of course, then outperforms Germany on other fronts, in particular sort of ICT technologies and the skills associated with that. So the point here is that, both these countries are really deeply, very deep into this transition to a knowledge economy, but, which technologies and which skills are figuring most prominently is strongly conditioned by features, again, of the social and economic context. So the general point here would be that I think there's much to be done at looking at how different organized interests and a country's previous growth regime, if you will, really is affecting the technological trajectory, both in terms of the choice of these technologies and in terms of how they're getting deployed. So a second sort of bucket of issues is that I think is really, that I see this group working on, that I think really is exciting and deserves more attention, is just analyzing how and why even the very same technologies can have very different impacts when they're implemented in different contexts. And here I would flag the work of Valeria and Dario, who among other things are showing that in some contexts, in particular Southern and Eastern Europe, industrial robots are getting deployed in ways that simply replace labor, whereas in other contexts, these technologies are getting deployed in ways that enhance not all, but at least some of the occupations that are required to operate them. And here I would just also draw attention to the work of sort of links to the work of colleagues of mine at MIT. As I was telling people at lunch, I was part of a project at MIT that was led by David Otter and David Mendel, so an engineer and an economist, called Work of the Future, and a whole bunch of reports sort of, this Work of the Future project involved a whole bunch of people working on different aspects of this. But one of the interesting studies that came out of this was by Julie Shaw, who is an engineer, and she studied the use of collaborative robots, cobots as they're called, in Germany. And what her work really drew attention to the way she was very interested in how these technologies are introduced and deployed. So not so much on the impact, but how are they introduced in different contexts and how are they deployed. And what she wound up finding is that, labor voice, labor involvement in the introduction of these cobots was producing these kind of win-win solutions. Win-win in the sense that these technologies were both getting deployed not to replace labor, but to complement labor in various ways, but also, and at the same time, firms were really reaping much greater productivity and efficiency effects from the introduction of these technologies. So basically, she was finding that the introduction of these industrial robots was really only increasing firm productivity where they were implemented in what she calls a kind of bottom-up fashion, that is to say, drawing on the skills and the expertise of the skilled workers who were the ones with the kind of deep knowledge of the manufacturing process at the firms, and also a better sense of honestly where, how this technology could be used to provide solutions to specific inefficiencies that they could observe on the shop floor. So that's the second. A third is I think we need to be attuned to the ways in which the same technology introduced into different kinds of labor markets matters. And this is something that we were talking about at lunch. So I've studied platform firms, and my usual sort of default on platform firms is, from the perspective of the work that I've done in the context that I've been thinking about this, is that they often, or maybe always, introduce more precarity. And again, a shout out to Valeria and Dario, who have developed a much better and much deeper sense of sort of disaggregating the different dimensions of precarity. So not just income precarity, but also exposure to risk privatization, basically. But in any event, most of us, or at least the work that I'm most familiar with, is focusing on contexts in which platforms are replacing work that was once performed by full-time workers on standard employment contracts. But I think it's really important to be sort of attuned to what is the status quo ante into which these platforms are getting introduced. And so, for example, does it make a difference when they are being introduced into contexts where labor markets are already characterized by extreme high levels of precarity? And in this sense, I've learned, or on this score, or what opened my eyes to this a little bit, was the work by Aditi Suri, who has studied the impact of platforms in India, which is a country that already is characterized by extreme levels of informality. Precarity is sort of the norm, and where often workers in very low-end services, are kind of tethered to specific employers in highly personalistic relationships, right? These are relationships that are highly personalistic, also characterized by extreme inequalities in power, asymmetries in power. And just as an aside, I can say that characterization is really applies equally well to large segments of the care sector in the United States of America, right? We have no big elder care, public elder care service, daycare. A lot of this is very precarious and very personalistic. And what Suri is arguing is that platforms, or what her research seems to indicate, is that there are certain contexts in which the introduction of platforms can actually reduce precarity. And I think we should be, it's not my particular way into this, but I think we should be aware of it. And to me, it sort of explains a little bit why in Denmark, for example, when cleaning platforms were introduced into Denmark, Hilfer in particular, the unions actually welcomed the introduction of Hilfer, this cleaning platform, into the Danish labor market, because it lifted what is otherwise a very much gray/black market operation, lifted it out of the shadows and allowed them to regulate that. And so now they have collective agreements with Hilfer, and other platforms have followed this. Then there's other work that sort of, and more to be done in terms of studies that kind of reverse the arrow, not just how technology influences the quality and quantity of jobs, but looking at the other way around. And here I would cite, Mario's work with colleagues showing that, new technologies introduced in the context of high quality labor often drives innovation, whereas if you introduce these same technologies in contexts where the quality of labor is low, that's just basically allowing low productivity firms to survive. And so work by Mario and colleagues that I'm aware of is really tackling this at a kind of macro or sectoral and cross-national level. But it also seems to me that there's work to be done that's kind of complementary to that looks more at the sort of micro level and at the mechanisms. How exactly does labor voice in Julie Shaw's characterization, in her study, how exactly does labor power and voice drive innovation? And here I just wanted to give one example from a study that I read recently by Herman Bender and Fredrik Söderqvist. It's a study of a Swedish mining company, Boliden, and they wanted to introduce a new underground positioning system. The idea was to outfit workers with, tracking digital tags so that the company would know where everybody was at all times. And so from the company's perspective, this was both a safety issue, but also it was meant to really enhance the efficiency of this operation, because they would be able to streamline coordination across workers that were in very different parts of the mine. And the unions kind of shared these safety concerns, but they were understandably worried that this technology would simply be used to surveil them, to monitor them, to engage in speed-ups. And so basically how it all came out is that they reached a compromise that really allowed the company to achieve the efficiency gains that the firm was after, but also protect workers from surveillance, basically by putting the system under the control, anonymizing it, and putting it under the control of the unions. And the case is important to me, not just because it was a better outcome for labor, although that too, but because it resulted in an innovation through the development of this new, very union-friendly monitoring, a positional monitoring system that this vendor is now selling to other clients as well. In other words, this company is now not just known for the minerals that they mine, but also for this general mining technology that they've put on the market. Just two final, I know I'm running out of time, but two final things. One is just the sources of platform power. The kind of power, we were talking about this at lunch, the kind of power that platform firms wield really doesn't fit a lot of the old categories of instrumental, structural power. We're talking about infrastructural power. Dario has been building on this by talking about the way in which the American military, for example, has become extremely reliant on certain of these platforms in order to, as part of this geopolitical competition with China, and that's obviously an important research frontier. And then finally, and just really briefly, AI. That's where I see this team as really also doing really frontier work. You just cannot understand the impact of AI or any technology actually, without understanding the political and social context in which it's getting deployed and adapted. And here Fosca and Luca are doing this wonderful work on coevolution and the ways in which the technology and the humans who develop them are sort of influencing one another. And basically what this shows, I think it just highlights what Guglielmo was talking about, how critical it is to bring a multidisciplinary lens to really all of these kinds of questions. So I'm excited about the discussion to follow. So thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for this introduction, which also paid due attention to the labor issue. And now I would give the floor, given that she's already been mentioned, to Fosca Giannotti, who is a professor of information science at Scuola Normale Superiore. And also she plays a very important role in development of research in this field. She directs the knowledge discovery and data mining laboratory, and she has a leading role in the FAIR project, Future of Artificial Intelligence Research, which is a next generation EU-funded large partnership among research centers, universities, and so on in this field. Welcome, Fosca. Thank you for joining us from online, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for organizing this important workshop and joining the various communities that indeed there is so we are living a moment where really we need to join forces among different scientific communities, because we, as Kathleen was saying, we are really in a moment of transformation. We are in the project FAIR, as you say, the national project on foundational artificial intelligence. In the spoke, it's the way the project is organized at different level. So it is organized in 10 spokes. The spokes I am belonging to, it's a human-centered AI. And with these terms, we meant so the vision that we have to design, monitor, implement AI systems with attention of since the beginning, since it's the design phase, to the ethical values that we want incorporate in such system, and also try to set up all the possible evaluation methods for observing the risk that may be at different level, at individual level in the human-machine interaction, and at the collective level at different scales. So, and that's the research that we are trying to the interdisciplinary research that we are trying to tackle within one of the work packages of FAIR, which is exactly observing the impact of AI and putting on the table different evaluation methodologies, simulation methodologies that might also to let understand what might be the impact in various dimensions, with respect to various dimensions of adopting artificial intelligence in a context. That will be the talk of Luca. So we shaped this area with the names Coevolution, because once we inserted in a society a new device which articulate our daily life, we are changing, and of course we are also changing the devices, because the devices based on AI are learning on our newly produced data. So there is this coevolution of the systems, and what can be an optimization in the short term may have a different impact. I mean, you highlighted this also with the digital platform. In the long run, that can be a different impact. And modeling this long run impact means also to use different methodology. It's not only anymore artificial intelligence, which is enough. We need also to have different machineries for work on this. So that's why mathematics and also the complex system way of modeling the phenomena is also very much important. So this is one of the topics that we are tackling in FAIR. in terms of studying the impact on society. There are several topics which are worrying us. One is the impact, one of the other impact that we are worrying now is the impact in workforce. You know that the last 2 years there has been an enormous discussion, debate on the impact that a new form of AI will have on society, which is generative AI. That's another important phenomena to study, because that there will be a change of many works, a change of in their daily activities, and there might be some replacement that also we have to evaluate. That's another important topic that we have to study is together with the multidisciplinary communities. So that's why we consider a moment like this one, a moment where we reflect on what is happening, very much important. I will now give the floor to Luca Pappalardo, which is one of the researchers that works in this area. The previous name of this area was of this research was social AI. But anytime that we are talking of social AI, that was very much associated with ethics, and it's a little bit more. We want to also simulate this coevolution of those two interconnected world, a society, techno-social system in which we will be posed. So now I don't take any more time. So thank you very much again for the organization, and I let to Luca go a little bit deeper and showing a couple of examples that will give you an idea of the approaches that we are following now. But we are open to any recommendation or suggestion from different scientific communities.
Thank you very much, Fosca. Now, well, we already introduced Luca Pappalardo, so I don't really, my job is redundant, I realize. It's an effect of human intelligence, not only artificial intelligence. But Luca is a researcher at Isti-Cnr, the National Center of Research in Italy, and at Scuola Normale Superiore. He's an expert of big data and human behavior and human mobility. Thank you for this very quick mobility, by the way, and the floor is yours now.
Okay. Now, yes, okay. Bello della diretta. Okay, no, thank you also to Fosca for the wonderful introduction to the concept of human AI coevolution. I would like to start to tell you how this idea of coevolution AI was born, and was born actually when I was, as I usually do, in August, in my birth city in Salerno. In Salerno there is this very beautiful lungomare, and there is a stand of used books. And I always go there because, you know, I like to read and to find used books. And especially I'm interested in this, in science fiction, and especially in this Urania collection. Some Italians may remember that there is this Urania collection, which is an entire collection dedicated to science fiction with books by Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, Ballard, Arthur C. Clarke, and so on and so forth. And then when I was this stand, I found this book, Guida alla Fantascienza, which in English is just on science fiction, of this special series of Urania, Urania Blue, pretty hard to find. And actually I took this book and started reading. I was completely shocked in a positive sense by this sentence I found in the book. Let me read this sentence because it's very crucial to what I would like to explain you. So change, constant change, inevitable change is the dominant factor in society today. You can no longer make any reasonable decision without taking into account the world as it will be. And this means that you must have a precise intuition of what the world will be like. Our policymakers, businessmen, and ordinary people must assume a sci-fi thinking, whether they like it or not, or even whether they know it or not. Only in this way can the terrible problems of today be solved. So what's the core of this sentence? Is that actually in order to understand, in order to make reasonable decisions about today, we have to imagine how the world will be like in the future. because our world is so fast changing that actually any decision took considering the world as it is now, it's useless because tomorrow will be different. Think of the advent of generative AI in past year, basically. So now I and other colleagues start thinking about the fact that actually humans and machines, and AI in particular, co-evolve in time. And this coevolution creates some effects that probably will generate unintended consequences in the long term. Look out. Col mouse. Perfect. So actually the coevolution is, our history of humankind is a history of coevolution, right? With other species, with industrial machines, with digital technology, and nowadays with artificial intelligence. So what is human AI coevolution? So we intend human AI coevolution as a perpetual iterative process wherein both humans and learning algorithms, which is a synonym for AI, evolve in tandem, each influencing the evolution of the other over time. In particular, of course, AI is a very general umbrella term. There is a particular kind of AI we are interested in because it's the kind of AI most influencing our digital choices and our decision every day, which is the recommenders. Recommenders are AI-based algorithms that suggest items or content based on users' preferences or specific requests. Think of Google Maps, the recommender you have on Amazon, the recommender you have on social media, which proposing new posts and people and so on. Think also of ChatGPT, which is a sort of recommender of content, in other words. So these recommenders, they mediate through online platforms most of our actions by exerting instant influence on many specific choices. They are ubiquitous, they're everywhere. So studying the role of this kind of AI, of recommenders, is a vantage point to analyze coevolution, human AI coevolution in general. That's why I would like to focus on recommenders. So it's important to know that recommenders have there are two main types of recommenders. The first one, actually three, but no, the third one is almost obsolete. So let me talk about these two only. The first one is collaborative filtering. Collaborative filtering is based on the fact that I have a history of some purchases, you have a history of some purchases, and we are maybe similar to a certain extent. So in order to suggest a new item to myself, I can pick up the people that are most similar to me and suggest the products that have been bought by these people, but not yet by myself. So if we both like science fiction, and you have read a book that I didn't, so probably that is a good suggestion to me. The other one, even more refined, is content-based filtering, which is based on sophisticated machine learning, which is able to capture what is the inner characteristics of the product I buy, the characteristics of the books, the characteristics of the roads I want to travel, the characteristics of the content I want to produce. And of course, the second one is more refined than the first one, but in practice, we don't know which kind of recommender these platforms use. Probably it's a mix of the two. It's a hybrid recommender. What is the problem? So why should we care about recommenders? For a simple fact, but very disruptive. That is, since these recommenders are based on AI, they always give rise to a feedback loop. The feedback loop is that user choices, our choices, determine the data on which these recommenders are trained. The trained recommenders then exert influence on our choices, which affect the next round of training, and so on and so forth, in a cycle that is virtually never-ending. So we start from user choices, we produce what it is called big data. Now, big data is a term that is a bit démodé, but 10 years ago, the buzzword was big data. So we produce this big data used to train the recommenders, which produce suggestion and so on and so forth. This feedback loop is inevitable because it's based on machine learning, and this is reinforced at every training step. So we don't know the frequency at which Amazon, Google Maps retrain these recommenders. It can be every day, it can be every month, we don't know, but they will retrain it at a given point. So they create a feedback loop. Why the feedback loop of today is different from the past feedback loop in history for 5 main reasons. Maybe there are more, but we identified these 5 main reasons. It's pervasiveness, traceability, persuasiveness, speed, and complexity. Pervasiveness is that recommenders, as I told, they are ubiquitous. They're in any online platform. Traceability is that we can, with digital platforms, track everything we do, so all the suggestions, all the choices. So this data can be used to train extremely persuasive recommenders, and recommenders can be trained without basically little or no human oversight. So they can be updated very, very fast. Finally, the volume interaction between users and product is unprecedented, so there is a very high complexity. Again, okay, why should we care again of the feedback loop? We should care of the feedback loop because the feedback loop can have and has unintended consequences in the long term. I will provide a few examples later, but you will probably already know that personalized recommendations on social media may artificially create echo chambers, filter bubbles, radicalization, profiling attack that advertising may increase inequality or create some bias and foster discriminations, navigation services suggesting routes to individuals may create congestion. Let me provide just a few examples, both anecdotal and experimental, let's say. You may already know about the Facebook files. So the companies providing social media services, they do perform some experiments to understand the long-term impact of recommenders, but they are not available to make them publicly available. So we know something because there was a leak some years ago by an ex-employee of Facebook, and actually they discovered and they make a study, non-published study, demonstrating that the algorithms in Instagram and Facebook, they have detrimental impact in the long term to teenagers, especially female teenagers, in terms of fostering anxiety, fostering some kind of outcome that we don't want for these people. Also, Facebook foster pathways of radicalization and violent content. This is something that they know, but they do not provide publicly because, of course, they are scared of the opinions that people may have about that. This is not only anecdotal because there are also studies, very rigorous studies. For example, there was a study published on PNAS about algorithm bias. So they took Twitter and now X, Twitter in 2000 something, maybe 16, they switched from a traditional recommender in which just you may see the post by friends in a reverse chronological order to a personalized recommender. But what they did is to provide to 1% of the population the old recommender, of course, without without telling these people that they had an obsolete recommender. So they could do a controlled experiment with a treatment study, with treatment group of people receiving the new recommender and a control group of people receiving the old one. They discovered that in several countries, as you may see, personalized recommendation amplify political messages, especially for right-wing parties. So not only there is an amplification of message for some parties, from some aspects of political aspects, but this is the strongest for right-wing parties. So it has a non-negligible effect on our society. Switching to another domain, the domain of human mobility, on which I am the most expert because I work on it since 10 years or so. So this is the city of Leonia. Leonia is a city in the countryside of New Jersey, that kind of city that you can see on the cinema, with the teenagers fighting, and that kind of very anonymous, U.S. city. But actually, it has a peculiarity, which is this kind of highway, the 95, if I'm not wrong. And it happened in 2017 that there were some works on the highway or an accident, I don't remember. But at a given point, the highway was completely blocked. So what you would do in this case? You ask Google Maps, Apple Maps, Waze, whatever, to reroute you. And this is what actually drivers did. But actually, these recommenders, rerouted all the vehicles through the narrow and hilly roads of Leonia, creating such a congestion that residents were not even able to go out of their houses with their cars. So the city was completely blocked. This is, of course, an extreme case. This extreme case is not alone, because actually several cases like that have been documented. But this raised a question to our laboratory, that is, what is the aggregate impact of everybody using Google Maps or TomTom or similar navigation services? So we did an experiment, a simulation, by using a standard simulator called Sumo, which simulates actually how cars move on the streets and so on. And actually, we discovered that we simulated the behavior of people following suggestion by TomTom and OpenStreetMap. And we discovered a very interesting pattern. So when the rate of adoption of a given service, for example, TomTom, is very low, then as you can see, there is an initial beneficial impact. But as the adoption rate is... Qualcuno si lamenta. Okay, that's fine. When the rate of adoption increases a certain threshold, then this impact starts to be detrimental. That is, the CO2 emissions increases because the navigation services create too much concentration, and so they're not beneficial anymore. This is a clear indication that probably at the individual level, under a certain condition, these services are beneficial, but if we see them at a collective level, this effect may be in the long term, but even in the short term, detrimental. The last example is about generative AI. As Fosca was suggesting, we cannot avoid discussing generative AI because it has been probably the biggest technological revolution since the internet. And actually, some scientists estimated that in the near future, most of the internet will be will be synthetic, so will be made of text generated by AIs. So believe it or not, probably if it is not 90%, it will be a significant fraction of what we do. So some scientists, including ourselves and Daniele, who is a PhD student here working on that, started a study on the so-called autophagy process. So the question is, what happens if we we fine-tune large language models not on real data made by humans, but on data produced by themselves, in what is called recursion or autophagy or self-consuming loop. There is plenty of nomenclature here, but I call it autophagy loop. What some scientists discovered, and our research confirmed this finding, is that at the long term, this autophagy process leads to model collapse. Model collapse means that actually the quality and the diversity of the content produced is reduced significantly. This means that the faces that we produce start to have some strange pixel on the faces, and the faces will be much more similar than each other than in the real world. Similarly, the text will be much less varied than it is in the real world now. So in other words, we are creating stuff with these models, but these models, if we continue like that, will be very bad in the future, because they will be increasingly trained on synthetic data. So this is yet another example that maybe we can do something that is normal, just using a tool, but in the long term, we have to care about what happens, because it can be that in the future, this model will be really bad and basically unusable. So we start thinking about a new field of study, Coevolution AI, to study actually the impact and the long term of AI on complex systems with an interdisciplinary approach made of computer science, artificial intelligence, mathematics, and sociology, and also complex systems, with a society-centric approach. What does it mean, society? Now, there are three main philosophical approaches to AI: human-centered, collective intelligence, and technocentered. So technocentered just say that you can solve technological problems with new technology. Human-centered is that they say, no, we need human values in order to guide these technologies. Collective intelligence says that in a sort of cyberpunk vision that humans and artificial intelligence should collaborate in order to provide an intelligence which is increased with respect to the single AI, the single humans. We are for a society-centered, which is based on three main points. The first one is that the feedback loop impacts human well-being not only at the individual level, but also at societal level, as I have shown. The second is that controlling the feedback loop requires a new methodological and epistemological approach. Third one is that the issues related to human AI evolution cannot be solved without legal and also political intervention. And indeed, just to conclude, I want to give you some highlights on what are these technical, epistemological, legal, and political challenges. On the technical challenges, which are really open, we need to find ways to continuously measure the impact of the feedback loop on the behaviors of humans and also on recommenders. How many interactions might be required before human behavior changes? So how many times we should retrain the model to see actually practical long-term effects? How long does it take a generative AI model to collapse? This model will be collapsed in 2 years, in 5 years, who knows? Then also we need mathematical models to capture the inner mechanism of feedback loop in order to control them. So the real purpose is to make new next generation AI that is tunable with respect to the impact the AI has on social media, on human mobility, on generative AI, on e-commerce, and so on. Epistemological challenge, even more challenging, is that we need to understand the causal interplay between humans and recommenders, and in both directions. So we need a bi-directional causal perspective, which is very hard to do because causal machine learning is not very well developed nowadays. Semi-finally, the legal challenges. All studies existing they have a limited reproducibility because they have been on platforms and not shared publicly, or because simply scientists like us working in the public, we don't have access to these platforms. And this is a big problem because if we don't have access, we cannot do controlled experiments, or we cannot study the impact of these platforms on society. So there are now, let's say, legal initiatives like the ESA. In particular, let me mention the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. Some people in the lab I work in are part of it, Dino Pedreschi. And actually, the very purpose is to find a way to conduct A/B tests on real platforms. So our dream is to find a legal way, technological way to go on platforms, buildings, and make some experiments on their data, on their users, in a controlled environment, also in a legally controlled environment. Now, the Digital Services Act imposes to platforms, to these platforms here, very large online platforms, to provide a way to assess the impact. We don't know how yet. So this is, we are implementing this Digital Services Act. So this is our proposal, the proposal by GPI, which is we need schemes to run A/B tests that should be tightly governed. So proposed tests should be motivated, of course. Proposals should undergo an ethics overview by a panel composed by people in the platform and outside the platform. The tests would require consent from participating users. The experiment I mentioned to you about Twitter, they don't specify any consent. So we assume there was no consent by the users. If accepted, these A/B tests would need to be publicly pre-registered to avoid cherry picking. And also the data that are the outcome of this experiment should be public. So for other scientists to build on it and make other experiments. So we should go in a perspective that is similar to medicine. So when you provide a new drug, you should make experiment and make it public what is the impact. We advise something similar for services like social media. Of course, I know that it is a bit utopistic, but in an ideal world, I think we should know what is the impact of a service before the service is deployed. Okay, then, of course, political challenges, the means of recommendation, they are concentrated in a few hands. So there are a few platforms. This is not very good for controlling them because they are gaining more and more power. And also, we need political intervention in order to redistribute this power among a market of many players. So this is not only done by me, but with a little help from my friends, citing Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album. Actually, the contribution is not little by the colleague, but it's huge because we are a group of many people working at CNR, University of Pisa, Scuola Normale Superiore, including Fosca, Dino Pedreschi, and Mirko Nani, who are the directors. And we are all working on these 4 ecosystems: social media, generative AI, urban applications, as well as e-commerce. And these are a few references if you want to, let's say, learn more about the concept of evolution. And especially we did this paper this year, Human AI Coevolution, where we present all the stuff I talked about. That's it. And I will conclude again with the Asimov sentence, which is actually illuminating to me, and I hope to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luca. You provided some additional reason to enjoy events like this while we can, where there is both diversity and high quality, before they will all be low quality and monotonous. And you should, in your spare time, you should write some dystopian science fiction for Urania. But in the meanwhile, given you mentioned the political, it's nice how every presentation already introduced in the next one, you introduced the political issues. And we have now Professor Hans-Jörg Trenz, who is a professor of Sociology of Culture and Communication here in this faculty. And we'll talk about the public perceptions of artificial intelligence. Thank you, Hans-Jörg. Thank you.
Thank you. And this indeed means that we will shift a little bit the perspective now, and we will use this as a kind of opportunity to present some of the ideas we are trying to develop here at Strozzi. We are the Strozzi team in FAIR. It is Silvia and I. And as a matter of fact, we are sociologists or political scientists, and we wish to contribute from a more social science perspective to the understanding of artificial intelligence, its application, and its impact. This introduces a little bit the society perspective that Luca was already mentioning in his presentation, that to understand these feedback loops, there is a need to work interdisciplinarily. And what do we do as political scientists? Well, we look at public opinions. That was our first idea. What could be an approach, an original approach from our perspective? Let's have a look at public opinion about artificial intelligence, its applications. And of course, we are not able to run our own public opinion survey. So my intention here is just to give you an overview about what do we have, and also to discuss a little bit why is public opinion on artificial intelligence interesting at all. And it measures certainly the knowledge, and it measures attitudes also of support or of opposition about the development and about the application of a new technology. Is this useful knowledge? Is this public opinion on AI useful measurement? Well, it is useful information certainly for government as regulators to know what people demand in terms of regulations, for instance. But it is also useful for the industries to know about the perceptions of opportunities and also the concerns that people have with the application of artificial intelligence. And both government and industries have expectations in how public opinion should be. So the one believes that people should have knowledge and that people should be concerned. The others might claim that they are too much concerned and that a better knowledge should help them to calm down a little bit. So public opinion polls then in a way are a battlefield for knowledge about artificial intelligence. And we want to understand here a little bit what is this battle about what people should know, what they should not know, what risks they should believe, should perceive, and which not. And if you look now at existing public opinion polls, there's actually very little. So if you ask people, this is a survey from the US, are you concerned or are you excited about artificial intelligence? Imagine just someone asked you whether you are concerned or excited. Why should you be excited about the use of artificial intelligence? In our case, I'm not particularly excited seeing my students maybe in the future writing their essays with artificial intelligence. It's not a question of excitement. If you ask the average citizen about being excited or not, this becomes even more vague. What is the reason of excitement of elderly people that a robot will provide care for them in the foreseeable future? So there is a growing concern, as you can see here. There are more people concerned than excited. But what does this mean then, actually? And here, if you look more concretely, what concerns are raised? When it comes to the concrete, are they concerned, for instance, with safety questions? Well, not really. Or at least they cannot really bring it to the point if you ask them. So the responses of the population reflect rather a general lack of knowledge about potential breaches of privacy or potential abuses of artificial intelligence. And instead of asking for stronger control of developers or governments, they tend to trust in government. They ask experts and governments often to have a monitoring function over the development of artificial intelligence and its use. They demand for regulatory authority. This is quite visible. We will also come back to this. So there do not seem many politically motivated concerns. I would rather claim that there is a general kind of ontological unease with the development of artificial intelligence. This here is from the Artificial Intelligence Policy Institute. It's a US-based think tank. They are most explicit about what these growing concerns are about. They report here that 86% of the voters believe that artificial intelligence would accidentally cause a catastrophic event. 70% agree that mitigating the risk of extinction from artificial intelligence should be a global priority. 82% of voters don't trust tech executives to regulate AI, and voters would support a federal agency in the US regulating AI, which is quite remarkable because in the US usually people are rather hostile towards state authority of regulation. And 76% of voters believe that artificial intelligence could eventually pose a threat to the existence of the human race. And this is equally so among Democrats and Republicans. So AI issues seem to be one of the few issues that actually unite the Americans. Now, if you look closer, what is the AI Policy Institute? It's a think tank. It's in their mission, they say it's a research think tank founded by Daniel Colson to advocate for ethical oversight of artificial intelligence for mitigating potential catastrophic risk. So they already have a quite apocalyptic vision in their mission statement. So we need to ask a little bit about the kind of reliability of these surveys provided by them, because they also seem to be political entrepreneurs in running such opinion polls. Are there better data in Europe? In the European Union, you have the Eurobarometer surveys, but they did not very much deal with artificial intelligence. There was the only thing I found was a 2021 survey where they list various new technologies. And for each of these technologies, they ask the Europeans, do you think it will have a positive, a negative, or no effect on your way of life? And you see that artificial intelligence is relatively low here. There is a majority of people who are rather concerned and believe that this has a negative effect or a fairly negative effect. Still, however, there is a majority that thinks it is at least fairly positive, but this is not very impressive compared to solar energy or wind energy. It actually comes right next to nuclear energy, where you have an almost identical pattern of seeing positive or negative effects. Feelings about artificial intelligence, this would be another survey. by the IPSO data comprising 31 countries in Europe and in other parts. This shows more or less everything. Half of the people believe in whatever. So half of the people believe that products and services using artificial intelligence have more benefits. Exactly the same percentage thinks that using artificial intelligence makes them nervous. So the question here is not so much what can we learn about patterns of distribution of attitudes of the population here. I think the patterns here is really that there is a kind of normative question behind these public opinion polls, that those who commission these polls also have a kind of normative idea what people should believe, what type of knowledge people should have. If you ask us, the experts here, we could also make a survey among fair researchers, maybe that would be interesting. And I am convinced that the overwhelming result would be that we care far too little about the potential impact of artificial intelligence. And experts also express themselves all the time in interviews. Here I have 3 quotes by experts, which are quite indicative for how they express themselves. The wisdom of the expert is the following. Here's the first quote. The real risk of artificial intelligence is to believe that AI can resolve everything. Next one says, the real risk is to believe that artificial intelligence is intelligent. And then there's a third one who says, by far the greatest danger of AI is that people conclude too early that they understand it. So experts reflect public opinion more than they impact them in such statements. They seem to be fascinated and scared at the same time. They are simply also humans and not only experts. And they take also a new role as a moral authority. I think this is quite important to understand here. It is the moral authority of the expert, and also people coming from computer science increasingly see themselves pushed into this role. This here is another statement. Who said this? Any idea? Was the Pope, actually. The Pope on a G7 summit in Borgo Egnazia 2 weeks ago. He also becomes one of these experts. And, artificial intelligence can still affect public opinion indirectly. This is a debate we have in political science from a normative political theory perspective, the impact on democracy, that even if opinions about risk and benefits of artificial intelligence are not clearly shaped, as we saw before, the use of artificial intelligence in political communication might have indirect effects on public opinion formation. And this has to do with what is often referred to as the loss of truth, that the use of digital technologies makes it increasingly challenging to discern factual accuracy from misinformation. It's a loss of truth, and where people will think everything, and that everything is made up. So there is the loss of certainty here. And there is also what is referred to as the trust paradox, that people feel urged to make use of artificial intelligence or to rely on artificial intelligence, even though they have little trust in it. They fear to miss out something, or there might be many risks, but the possible benefits still outweigh, so it is worth trying. This is a little bit the attitude. But the more information then is generated by AI, the more social and political trust is also corroded. So we can no longer trust our students to write their essays, but also in everyday relationship, we no longer trust our friends, whether the pics they post from their holiday on Instagram are real or faked. So there is a trust in political trust that relates to a loss of trust in social relationships, which has then an important impact for social integration and for democracy. And measuring then public opinions about the risk and benefits of AI might be a little bit too premature at this point, because knowledge is simply not consolidated, or also simply because there is a battlefield of public opinion which has just been opened. So there are several stakeholders that want to impact public opinion, including the industries, including the developers, and they try to influence public opinion. They run AI PR campaigns, which becomes almost a business here. And there is a lot of investment in public relations by the producers, also by states, by the way, in the form of educational programs. So AI has become a topic of electoral campaigns. We will discuss this later with Silvia, because this relates to some of the research we do, how AI becomes politicized by political parties. And what we will do then is to ask, instead of asking what is public opinion, we should ask who makes public opinion and who has an impact on public perceptions of AI. This will be a little bit our contribution in the FAIR project. It's a question of power over public opinion. Are the tech giants dominant? Do they shape our minds, or do political parties claim back here authority over defining the issue? Is there a plural and balanced debate also about AI impact? Are citizens, civil society given voice? So we could argue that there is a kind of democratic control deficit also, in the sense that public communication about the use of AI is dominated very much by elites, by experts and tech giants, and that there is a need to empower citizen voice. So ultimately then, behind the interest in public opinion research is also, I think, a political theory interest here, which is the question of the possibility of common ethical standards that guide the use of AI, and the question whether an agreement on AI ethics is actually possible across cultures, across the globe. And the important question behind here is, can we agree on the use of AI? Are there shared ethical principles that make us agree on the responsible use of AI? Or is there an ethical colonialism, how the West, for instance, imposes an AI ethics on other parts of the world? And here we can go back again to these quotations here by the Pope, who, if the struggle to define a single set of global values, the Pope said, we can at least find shared principles with which to address and resolve dilemmas of conflict regarding how to live. So we should not expect agreement here on AI ethics, but we should expect growing disputes, and we need kind of democratic procedures then to solve these out. And this includes global politics and also democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans-Jörg. I think it's a bit gross for the Pope to be critical of artificial intelligence, given that he chairs a whole organization based on non-human intelligence. But, Silvia Keeling now from Scuola Normale Superiore. She's a researcher here in this faculty, and we'll talk about the EU Artificial Intelligence Act and the 2024 European Parliament elections. You see how quick we are at analyzing issues.
Yes, thank you so much. Together with Hans-Jörg, what did I do? Nothing. Okay. Together with Hans-Jörg, anyways, I work on the evaluating. We were tasked within the FAIR project to evaluate the social and political impact of artificial intelligence, and that's obviously comes with the problem of how to operationalize such task and such. Okay. So how to operationalize such task, and as Hans-Jörg was saying previously before me, one way we have as social and political scientists is to look at public opinion, but as we've seen, secondary data and questions have some problems at the moment, because the questions might be a little bit rhetorical. They may be subject to desirability bias. So there is a lack of questions that measure contentious opinions or values that people give to issues related to artificial intelligence. The questions that are publicly available investigate more about the habits, people's habits, or they are more like yes and no questions that don't capture the multidimensionality of the concept. And when we look at how the the concept of artificial intelligence and the various issues related to its use are politicized. Secondary data falls short at the moment. So we approached this task to study how the impact of artificial intelligence on society by looking at who is politicizing it, who is trying to implement regulation and trying to discuss and become a spokesperson for this regulation between, like institutions and the public opinion. So how is the public opinion, which is right now very, like not really, it's indecisive on the topic because it's a very broad and very new topic and technical topic. So who is shaping this opinion and what values are attached to certain issues? So it's a very, very large topic. And opinions, we were looking at some polls earlier today as well, and opinions look like they are shaped around demographic characteristic, for instance, but they don't seem to be siding on political and ideological cleavages. So this is where our research is placed. Okay. So how is it politicized? It's politicized when there's some value orientation given to certain issues. And when this is negotiated, so we see negotiation among different stakeholders that are interested in the topic and, for instance, conflicting parties. We've started our research by looking at a case study specifically, so that's the AI Act, how it was negotiated, to understand first and foremost the issues that draw more attention, and second, how they became embedded with political cleavages and values. This is the research design. So our analysis started from looking at the AI Act process and negotiation, understanding, as I said before, the issues that were most salient. Later on, we selected the case study of the European parliamentary elections and the debate rising from the European parliamentary elections. And our aim is to see how politicians who were involved in the regulation of the European Artificial Intelligence Act, but also the parties, European parties and national parties, took the chance of the campaign to talk to their voters about this regulation and how did they speak about it. So what were they critical about? What were they supporting? So our question was to see whether the debate, was there a debate and how was it oriented, and was it growing and was it engaging for people? So basically, the empirical side of this research went into looking at, during the electoral campaign, who was speaking about the regulation on artificial intelligence, how were they speaking about it on social media platforms. And obviously, before starting the empirical side, we looked at the manifestos to see how, again, political parties and European parliamentary groups were speaking about the regulation on artificial intelligence, and specifically about the AI Act, and how were they proposing different regulation or approving the one already in place, like an achievement, and taking a stance as it was their achievement to having proposed certain regulation. After which we drafted a code book to analyze how the debate was structuring and it has structured on social media. So we went through a live coding. We were 6 coders, so not only me and Hans-Jörg, but also other people participated in the live coding. And every day we looked at some profiles taken from national parties, European parties, the Spitzenkandidaten, and some relevant MAPs that were trying again to gain a seat in the European Parliament. And we looked at how every topic, every post they issued, we tried to code it immediately within a framework, and especially paying attention to those that were dedicated to artificial intelligence. Well, this is the first part of the research. Unfortunately, I don't have the results of the live coding yet. But in a nutshell, from the negotiations, we started to understand which were the contentious points of the Artificial Intelligence Act. And from the manifestos, I've placed most of the issues that I found that were relevant for each party. I've placed them on this framework that shows us that there are kind of like, well, it's a multidimensional concept, basically drawing from 2 lines, one that goes from regulatory to deregulatory, and the vertical line goes from cyber enthusiast to cyber skeptic. And I've placed each issue on this frame so to have an idea of how a political cleavage could arise from the party manifesto's differences. So we can see that, for instance, one of the most important issues that we find in the regulatory and cyber skeptic quadrant is surveillance. So there's a lot of anxiety around surveillance and the need to prohibit any kind of system that is attempting biometric recognition. Whereas if we look at the opposite side, so between cyber enthusiast and the regulatory quadrant, we see that instead they opt for the regulating bureaucracy, for instance, to have to promote innovation, technological innovation, but also international competition. So the hype is is around competing with China and the US on the market. So too much excessive regulation would be definitely hindering this competition. Okay, so after having designed this framework to understand political cleavage, we can see that basically these are the European parliamentary group that promote or fight against these issues. So you can see that they're really divided between center-left and center-right or conservative stances. So this is one of the main findings from the preliminary research on party manifestos. The live coding as finished, we will see whether the debate and building on social media is confirming what we found in the manifestos. We'll see also the quantitative side of it, so how much is artificial intelligence and the AI Act promoted in the debate, how much has it been spoken of, and in which ways, so which frame is given to each issue, and which are the links that were used to justify the political stances. We used X and Instagram mainly. And future steps, and then I'll wrap it up. Future steps will definitely look at how the AI Act is implemented in the regulation in Italy. Probably this will lead us possibly to a lit interviews, which will help us understand the entire process. It would be interesting to participate in calls for survey questions so as to propose some questions that can measure a trade-off and not only habits, but a trade-off between political cleavages, so we are able then to measure how people are actually, whether and how people are politicizing individually towards certain topics of artificial intelligence. For instance, are they more concerned about the protection of users' data, or are they more prone to collect these data for international competition and for business-related projects? And the future cleavage that it seems to be arising and we're monitoring so far is where is how the use, let's say the use of collective data. So as I was mentioning before, whether it's going only for the private sector, or whether it can become a public good, so then used in different ways, and research is one of them. Medicine is another one, and this is this is a very detailed. It's a very detailed slide, but basically it's introducing how the AI Act is being implemented by the Italian government, and there are some instances in how data can be used also publicly, so not only for business-related projects. And with this, I have finished.
Thank you very much. So now these two couples of presentation provided a fantastic and very promising insight on how much has already been done of research, both in the data science pillar and in the political science pillar of the FAIR project. And I would like to open the floor for a first little round of questions. Then we'll have a little break, then the second one, and then even more discussion. Any whether from the floor or from online? Questions, or also from Mario Pianta, please.
Thanks. Excellent presentation and a very interesting picture. When we have, if we look at the subjects that are on the table now, we have individuals as members of the public opinion, and we have some abstract authority that we hope can regulate. Okay, in the middle we have. We will discuss this also in the next presentation, but and we have also a global world. We are not talking about national states being able to regulate. So when we translate Asimov and public opinion service in reality, in real bodies, human bodies and institutions, there is a strong asymmetry between the concentration of platforms in the US and the parallel platforms in China that we have not discussed but are there. The lack of systematic power, the EU Act is a little bit of things, but is not covering all the legislation that can be done at the national. We miss a UN level. So I think an interesting way for I would like to hear your comments on the actual institutions and subjects and names that can play a role, and how can we challenge these to engage this development of actions and reflections, putting names on the table, perhaps.
Thanks to all the speakers. I really enjoyed your presentation and the different point of view on this complex and up-to-date topic, absolutely. I don't have a real question. Mine is more an observation and an idea to have a discussion about we've seen different point of view about the complexity, the epistemology, the impact on society, the coevolution, and also the politics party on about AI. And my idea is about the idea of freedom. So, are we working towards a certain kind of idea of freedom? My idea is based on J. Monat, a philosopher, an Italian philosopher, from that he worked a lot on the idea of the freedom of research and science and how we can work to support and understand the power of science in studying this kind of topics from a certain kind of point of view that is positioned inside a dialogue that now is not taking into account all the different perspectives and all the different outcomes, the potential unintended consequences that Luca talked about. So I don't have an idea on this. It's just a topic I want to discuss with you. Thank you.
Now, we have another question from the floor, and then I see a hand also electronically.
Yeah, thank you for the very interesting presentations. I would have a question maybe more for Luca, but also for on the AI Act. Because Luca was talking about the coevolution between humans and the machines, but then you have also mentioned that it's very important to have a regulation, and now the EU has a regulation. And I would be very curious to hear from you if you think that this regulation is enough, or like what would be the outcomes or the interactions between this human coevolution that you mentioned, if it will be effective in kind of avoiding the bad effects that you mentioned.
Yeah, thank you, Nicholas. Please, can you, well, is it quick? Because we have also a question from online. And then wait.
Yeah, it's a quick question. It's not a question. I was just wondering about the opinions of the speakers. So when we were talking about coevolution, basically we talked about human and AI mostly, that like grow and learn one from the other and so on. But I was wondering that maybe it's not just the two of them, but there is also the environment all around that also changes, and it's led to like well-known problems about the economic costs of AI and like sustainability and similar issues. So I was just wondering how these issues can be integrated in the coevolution framework. That's it.
Thank you. Matteo Fabbri, please.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi. I have a specific question for Luca regarding whether in your research project you have considered the impact of Article 27 of the DSA that requires a platform to make the recommender systems controllable through specific parameters. And since there are no delegated acts coming in this case, I would like to know if you have considered implementing in your simulation also specific kinds of user control to see whether user behaviors change also according to this kind of explicit feedback that users can give. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Now, we have a few questions, a bit for Luca, a bit for the political scientists as well. We go maybe in the opposite order, but maybe Hans-Jörg, you take the political one and then Luca. I would say Mario was a bit political no? If you
I don't have a specific response to this. Maybe I have a short comment to your question on freedom, which, from my understanding, is rather a debate about the limits of freedom and also the need to balance freedom and responsibility. But this is what ethics are about. So I don't see any particularity here in how this is applied to artificial intelligence. There's also the question of what could be called moral freedom, which is whether morality should limit the use of artificial intelligence and the way we develop also artificial intelligence, or whether we should call for something that is a more liberal approach, going beyond established norms and develop a new AI morality that would strongly reinterpret freedom.
Luca?
For the political part, you mean?
Which
In general?
Yeah, general. You can cope with big data.
That's there are a lot of ingredients to cook this cake, let's say, and then we try to make an answer that is good for almost everything. So the first point is freedom. I'm not sure I correctly interpreted what do you mean by freedom, because I'm not used to that kind of philosophical aspect. But there is an aspect that is important, in my opinion, that is AI recommenders, but AI in general, are a very powerful tool to compensate for what humans are not very good. So we are, at least this is my philosophical approach, very individualistic as individuals, right? So actually it is very difficult to act collectively toward the social good if we don't see clearly that the social good is beneficial for everybody and for ourselves especially. AI can compensate for that. So on the one hand, of course, we should provide recommendation to the users in such a way we satisfy their needs, and also we explain also the kind of decision AI suggests. On the other hand, AI is a powerful nudging tool to, let's say, force, I know that this is not very good, very nice word, but to force people to act towards collective goals. In an experiment we have done, we have made a new version of Google Maps in which two individuals having exactly the same origin and the same destination do not get the same solution, they get the same paths, but they get randomic paths that are more diverse among each other. So of course, this means that you provide a suggestion that is not optimal to the user, so you force the user to travel a bit longer, but this bit longer means an advantage for the collectivity. So how to find a trade-off between not forcing people to act too much collectively, but not forcing them to act much individually, is a trade-off to be solved, I think, with regulation and also with new technology. Another point is that regulation is enough or not. Of course, it is not, because the way you regulate now, again, coming back to Asimov, you regulate the world as it is, but the world will evolve. So the AI in 2 years will be completely different from the AI we have now. So probably another kind of generative AI will come out, or another kind of AI will come out, and so the world will be yet not prepared for that. So regulation is not enough. It is enough to take a sort of sci-fi mentality in which we continuously monitor what happens, and based on what happens, we adjust regulation accordingly. So static regulation is not enough, but dynamic regulation may be, in my opinion, the way. And finally, controllable parameters and the environment. Will be very fast. So for controllable parameters, the problem is that we don't have access to the platforms they use. We don't know which kind of algorithm they use. Well, we know the algorithm that is employed in Twitter, because Elon Musk, the first thing he has done is to make the algorithm, the code of the algorithm public. But we don't know which kind of algorithms, what are the parameters they use. We have the APIs. APIs are this programming interface that you may invoke to gain the service, but we don't know the detail within the algorithm. So on the one hand, what we can do and what we have done is to make simulations up to now in which we take the principle of the algorithm that we may imagine it is implemented, collaborative filtering or personalized. We imagine what are the parameters used, and we actually can make experiments, what-if analysis by changing these parameters. This is something that people actually do, and also we are doing in our lab. And actually, we discovered that in some cases, the parameters are very impactful. In some other cases, they are not. So there is a very inconsistent situation regarding the results we have. Finally, the environment. Of course, to simplify the modelization, we just consider humans and AI. Of course, the environment is part of it. So our idea is to analyze the impact of those two on the environment, so to take the environment and to put the environment within the feedback loop, which is actually a human environment AI feedback loop. The environment will change. Our idea is that the environment will change based on the interaction between human and AI. So the changing of the environment is what we measure, because we want the environment to change in a way that is beneficial to the collectively and not detrimental. Again, the case of CO2 for navigation services is prototypical, because we monitor the choices of individuals on the roads and the suggestion provided with a given nudging power. And then we see what are the outcomes, that environmental outcomes that emerge from this interaction between the two. So this is our way to introduce environment. Of course, it should be probably introduced also mathematically, but for now, for purposes of simplicity, we just model it as human-AI interaction.
I wonder whether Fosca wanted to add something, but I didn't see the hand, electronic hand coming up. So maybe we'll have now a few minutes break. Kathleen, oh, sorry, I think she's there. Oh.
Yeah. Can I speak?
Sure. Yes.
Can you hear me? No, I think that one important point that has been raised that's on the EI Act that also Luca mentioned. I think that so EI Act is definitely, I mean, a good framework for I mean, putting some guardrails to the risk, enforcing the developer to design and to think to the various issues in the design phase. I think that's at least for very critical and high risk application. I think it's and in some sense it has also there are some points that is a sort of dynamism in the sense that the selection of what are the high risk and medium risk applications has been settled now, but it's open to be changed also in the follow. So it is a good framework that at least poses some guidelines for developing the system. For example, the very high risk system, they are also obliged to imagine the economic and social impact. So in some sense, we are forcing the developments of trying to go in a direction that the impact in society is one topic since the beginning. So maybe it's not ideal, but I think it's has been a good intervention of Europe in that sense.
Something good from Europe. Good. Kathleen will comment maybe at the end. Does she have a few words?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think what comes out of this whole discussion for me are two big conundrums. We were talking about conundrums at dinner, at lunch, and two of them really popped out of this. All of these, taken together, these various things. One comes out of Luca's, which is this. On the one hand, so just the ubiquity of unintended consequences, such that sometimes AI is generating answers that even the creators did not anticipate, right? So this is just the reality. This is just how it currently is operating. But there's a conundrum because the solutions that we're trying to sort of reach toward are those, in Luca's sort of words, we need to know the impact of a model or a platform before it's deployed. In other words, it's not enough to just kind of clean up after the fact. You have to actually be able to anticipate these things. And so this, to me, is just like an extreme technological conundrum. And it combines with the political conundrum that came out of the, for me at least, the work of the political scientists here, which is sort of this whole question of democratic or any kind of control over these technologies, but ideally some sort of democratic control, because a lot of the language or a lot of the arguments in the presentations had to do with, well, do we really want to delegate this to some experts, or do we want some sort of democratic control? And it seems really hard. Like, I don't know exactly what people were thinking when they received when they were asked those questions on the first round of public opinion questions, survey questions that Hans-Jörg put up. But my guess is, like we're 82% or whatever, we're really not, we're a little bit worried about this. But my guess is, I just wonder how much people actually understand the technology and what they even understand when somebody says artificial intelligence. It just sounds, if you don't know very much, we all kind of have some background in this or like whatever, or listen to podcasts about it or something. But for the average American, it probably just sounds kind of scary from the get-go, just because it's artificial, but it's intelligent. And so then to me, that really is another conundrum. If we don't want this to be, if we don't want the regulation to fall entirely to sort of faceless technocrats, or certainly not to the big tech companies themselves. I remember I went to a forum several years ago. Nick Clegg, who was running around being Facebook's sort of international public affairs person, and he was confronted with this audience. It was at the Heritage School, who was saying, we got to regulate, and he says, yeah, regulate us, just do something. And they were really saying, like, you take responsibility for imposing your rules, and then you have to be responsible. And of course, the regulation is difficult to figure out what are exactly the rules that we want to impose on these companies. And so if you combine that with the difficulty, like, I'm willing to delegate the regulatory authority to experts like Luca, but beyond that, like, who exactly, how do we organize a process through which we can have some sort of democratic input in a context in which we have to move fast, and most people actually, I also have a very dim understanding of this thing, and this is a subject that I've actually spent a little bit of time thinking about. But so anyway, just these two conundrums really presented themselves coming out of this set of conversations.
Thank you, everybody. We'll have a few minutes break, and we'll start in the next session in 5 minutes, five sharp. Otherwise, we will not be able to finish. Thank you.
Welcome back. Let's have this second part of the workshop on the governance of digital platforms and artificial intelligence. I am Mario Pianta, and I chair the Istituto Ciampi. We have now a sequence of contribution touching on the problems of the media system and the EU regulation, the economic and labor and social dimension, the model of digital cooperatives. The first speaker is Sofia Verza, who presents work together with Urbano Reviglio from the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom at the European University Institute. The title of her presentation is Content Moderation in Digital Platforms and EU Regulations. And then we will have other 3 presentations. So I give the floor to Sofia, and I look forward to opening up the next round of discussions.
Yes, can you hear me well? Yeah. So thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation today. So our focus given our background, is on content moderation, especially with regards to content that is related to news and current affairs. So to information that impact on public opinion with regards to also political participation, civic participation, eventually political choices. Something of what we're going to say has been anticipated in the previous panel, so I'll try to be quick on that. So first of all, what's content moderation? So content moderation are all these mechanisms of removal, reduction, or on the other side of amplification of visibility of online content. This may regard illegal content online, but also disinformation or borderline content which is not illegal but considered to be harmful, or these mechanisms of algorithmic personalization that Luca was speaking about earlier. These can be executed by human moderators or by fully or partially automatic algorithmic systems. Here is a bit of a scheme of where certain kinds of content may fall into. For example, illegal content. Here you see arms, guns, or bitcoins automatically finish into a system of removals. There might be some borderline content, erotic content, pornography that is subject to human review, or eventually this content will be labeled or downranked in its visibility. And then what falls out of this is more than moderated, is recommended. So it follows patterns related to our likes and our preferences, and targeted to different users in a different way. So as Luca anticipated, we have this new regulation from the EU institutions, the Digital Services Act, that was enacted in 2022 and became entered into force in February 2024, so very recent, which defines for the first time what's content moderation. So here you can see the definition. These are the automated or not activities that detect and address content that might be illegal or incompatible with terms and conditions of the platforms. This has to be kept in mind, this difference between what is illegal, which is actually decided by the states, and then might be different from country to country, and what is instead incompatible with terms and conditions, which is eventually decided by platforms. These actions may affect the availability of content online, the visibility, accessibility through various forms of actions and remedies such as demotion, disabling of access, removal, suspension of accounts. So just to quickly go through them, one of them is removal, which is actually maybe the more classical, let's say, form of content moderation, which was taking place also offline, so to remove content that is considered to be illegal. This might lead to over removals or under removals, but also what is worth to be noted is that it's subject to biases and to is susceptible to target certain groups or certain perspectives more than others. But what is actually particularly relevant in the online sphere is, rather than removal, which is of course is a big topic, is that the issue of demotions. So when content remains online, but users or large part of them are not able to find it anymore, because it's not prioritized in the social media feeds. So when users are not aware of that, or they don't really know why that is happening, that is called shadow banning. And later we will look into practical examples of that that relate with the recent political events. Then labeling might happen, so certain content is labeled, for example, to let the user know that that content has been fact-checked, or that that user is the actual real famous person that you're looking for, etc. And amplification falls into largely into the sphere of recommender systems, and so the fact that. And DSA also, the Digital Services Act, defines what a recommender system is and defines it as a fully or partially automated system used by an online platform to suggest specific information or to prioritize that information or to determine the relative order of prominence of the information displayed. So how the EU has been trying to govern content moderation in the last 20 years. So first of all, it's worth to kind of do a little historical excursus of the fact that historically hosting providers and in general intermediary platforms, so platforms that intermediate between content creators and those who receive and access those content, has been considered to be exempted from liability for the content that circulates in their platforms. And this is exactly what the e-commerce directive from 2000 was providing. So these platforms were not liable for the content that circulates in their platform. This is partially still true, but some steps forward have been taken, following especially some particularly breaking cases like that of Cambridge Analytica in 2016. First of all, the EU enacted a code of practice on disinformation in 2018, then updated in 2022. This is a self-regulatory code, so it's not hard law, but has suggested some interesting, useful directions that we can discuss upon maybe later in the context of tackling disinformation. Then there are two regulations which instead are hard law texts, so it means that they are directly applicable in the legislation of each member state of the European Union, which are the Digital Services Act, and recently in April 2024, the European Media Freedom Act was enacted. The Digital Services Act regulation, first of all, establishes some new legal subjects, among them very large online platforms and very large search engines that were listed by Luca before, among them Amazon, Google, Facebook, Meta, and others, which are platforms that have more than 45 million monthly active users. And for them, some particular requirements are provided. For example, the so-called duty of care. So they have from now on to conduct some periodical assessments of systemic risks that stem from their platforms, and to also put in place some specific mitigation measures for these systemic risks. So what are the systemic risks? These are consequences for, I would say, society at large that stem from the use of their services. And there is a exemplicative, so there is a list of examples in Article 34 of the DSA. Some of them are risks for freedom of expression, health, public health, or even negative consequences for a person's physical and mental well-being. So how do, under the DSA, intermediary services allow to moderate? What are the actions listed in the DSA? So with regards to recommender systems, a novelty, as I was saying, is that for the first time what a recommender system is legally defined, and then that as a person from the audience asked earlier, Article 27 and 38, then 38 in particular, provide for an opt-out option, meaning that the users, the recipients of the service, could be able to choose to use a recommender service that is not based on profiling of that user, but this actually still needs to be implemented, so we don't know how that will work in practice. And there are discussions also with regards to opening the market of recommender systems, which is now a complete monopoly by the very large online platforms. Then there is this notice and action mechanism, which is defined as the fact, this we are already used to, that users, other users may signal to the platform that some content is illegal, and a whole process of how the platform should address that is provided. Particularly interesting, in my opinion, in our opinion, is the introduction of a new, again, category of entities, which is that of trusted flaggers. So basically, they are special entities that can make these notice and complaints, and the platform should give priority to their complaints. These trusted flaggers will be selected by the national authorities that are put in place by this act. They are called digital service coordinators. Some countries already chose who they will be. In Italy, it will be Agcom, l'Autorità Garante per le Comunicazioni. In other countries, they are not still being, they have not been selected yet. But so they will indicate who these trusted flaggers are. And again, later we'll see an example of a category of trusted flaggers that is recently being selected. And finally, there are some measures against misuse. So platforms can suspend their services for two main categories of users: those who repeatedly and frequently publish illegal content, and those who repeatedly do notices that are not founded, not unfounded. So quickly, I will just here focus on the statements of reasons because I have not much time left. So this is, I have defined it the transparency kit. So the DSA provides for a lot of transparency measures to try to force online platforms to publish as much as information possible about their methods of content moderations, their tools, the parameters for recommender services. For example, in the terms and conditions, they should, and I'm reading, they should publish any use made of automated means for the purpose of content moderation, including a qualitative description of the precise purposes, the accuracy and possible rate of error of automated means, and also any safeguards applied. Also, anytime a platform suspends or moderates content online, it should communicate to the user a statement of reasons. And these are some of the contents that should be present in the statement of reasons regarding the territorial scope of the decision, but also the legal references, the reasons basically behind such suspension. And using the data related to the statements of reasons, a lot of studies can be made. Some of them have been published already with regards to what is the reasons behind the suspension or the removal or the disabling, demoting of content, which ones are removals, which ones are demotions, to what extent they were done through automatic means or not. So just to jump, this is the, to conclude about what we could do with this data, as Luca was mentioning, Article 40 of the DSA provides some larger access to data for researchers, But actually, it still leaves to the platform a lot of scope for rejecting such an access. For example, motivating it with the fact that this access would lead to significant vulnerabilities to their services, in particular with reasonings related to their trade secrets. But still, this is a big step ahead because now researchers and institutions have some space to try to access this data. Just to apologies, just one practical example of the first ever application of the DSA relates to the war in Gaza. So just right after the attacks of 7 October, Commissioner Thierry Breton sent a letter to the main very large online platforms asking for recalling their obligations under the DSA, which actually was still not in force at the time, and giving them 24 hours to answer and to address then formal requests for information that were asked in the following days in mid-October with regards to the dissemination of illegal speech and harmful speech related to the war in Palestine and to the terrorist attacks. So what happened later is that in December 2023, for the first time, there was a communication of the Commission that provides for the creation of a network of the so-called trusted flaggers that we were mentioning earlier. They will be specialized in anti-Semitic content online. They will be speaking Hebrew and Arabic. And then formal proceedings against X and TikTok have been opened. There has been massive criticism from civil society organization by this first DSA kind of implementation because of the fact of the short time frame that was provided, which is not that provided by the actual legal act, and because the institutions seem to pair disinformation and illegal content and harmful content, which are really vague categories, together in the same box. Of course, in a context of war and human rights breaches, this is very critical because it could lead to a total information blackout. We know what happened. Algo-speak spread online, the use of watermelons instead of the Palestine flag, the use of different symbols to be able to convey some messages online, so-called algo-speak. So maybe we'll dig into the Media Freedom Act in a second moment because we don't have much time. Just this regulates media content specifically by news organizations in relation to online platforms. They have some special privileges rather than other users from this moment on. But they have to self-declare, and online platforms can decide if to accept their applications or not. So to conclude, a lot of questions are still open because the implementation of these acts is ongoing, but some doubts can be raised with regard to the still externalization of this implementation left to private companies, still to a large extent, and to the fact that their editorial role in disseminating content is only indirectly regulated.
Thank you so much, Sofia. I think this is an interesting example of the complication of implementing regulation and addressing policies in this regard. Can you switch, please,
yes,
positions? Sure. We now move into the economic and labor dimension with Valeria Cirillo from the Università di Bari Aldomoro talking about the labor impact of digital platforms. After Valeria, Dario Guarascio from Sapienza Università di Roma will talk about the labor impact of artificial intelligence. The two presentations are mirror to one another, focusing first on the more wider use and the impact of digital platforms, and later Dario on AI. Valeria.
And Guglielmo for organizing this workshop today, and Kathleen Thelen for being here and listening to our research. In fact, I will focus on a stream of works, research that we have performed during these years, basically on the impact of digital platforms on labor. Both direct impact, so the working condition of those offering, selling their works through the platforms, and a more recent line of research that we are developing together with Dario and Jacopo Tramontano on an indirect impact on labor concerning the business, the firms, the company that sell their product through platforms such as Amazon Marketplace and so on. Well, in terms of rise of platform economy, just very quick few things, because already Kathleen was mentioning this at the beginning of the afternoon. Large digital platforms such as big tech are key drivers of structural change in contemporary capitalism. Why? First of all, because they concentrate a lot of techno-economic power. There are several contributions in this respect, one by Dario and colleagues, and a special issue also on the Cambridge Journal on this topic. The platforms are reshaping the operation of knowledge and innovation. So for us as Scuola, even in the innovation field, we are really concerned about the concentration of knowledge, in this sense, power, and so innovation networks, externality, how platforms reshape the ecosystem, and so on. And more recent, there is also a very much an attention in terms of labor and specifically capacity of control and surveillance of platforms on workers and consumer, of course. This stream of research has been developed by the Zuboff, for instance, saying that we are in a surveillance-based capitalism, so there is a new model of companies, a new conceptualization of firm, disarticulating the production process along a very huge, let me say, global value chain. This means the fusion of algorithmic management beyond the digital labor market. Adam Prussell was developing something on that, in the sense that we should care about platform not only in the platform itself, but even in traditional work context. What I mean is, if you go in a workplace like Amazon, in a fulfillment center, actually you see that work is basically controlled by new digital machine that incorporates some form of algorithmic management. Maybe Dario will develop a little bit more on that. This means increasing capacity of control used by company in relation to labor, stiffening hierarchical relation, and of course exacerbating the process of labor fragmentation and inequalities. In fact, I mean, few numbers on Italy says that on the base of survey available, that you have something about 42% of wage-based workers that do not have basically a contract. So they work for a platform, but they do not have any kind of contract. So this means actually an increase of inequality, because you have a large population of workers in this platform that they are not even covered by a type of contract. And we all know that the gender is very important in this aspect, because the 47% are actually women, and they do not have any kind of written contract when they labor for the platforms. What do economic says about the relationship between platforms and labor? Well, of course, this relationship is being theorized and developed under different type of perspective. You have a more microeconomic view, saying that the platform can have a negative impact on labor, on wages, although with ambiguities. This type of contribution mainly focus on more, let me say, neoclassical type of approach, like principal agent theory, so incorporating some sort of information asymmetry, but still saying, okay, maybe there is a monopoly type of power, you can have fragmentation, monitoring of work, different bargaining of power between platforms and workers and even firms, but still, I mean, in a principal agent type of framework where the information is the main issue. Other type of perspective says, okay, I mean, within this microeconomic view, say, okay, but the platform actually help lowering search and information transaction cost, reduction of asymmetric information, signaling, and also in some sense you can find studies saying, well, actually the platforms help to introduce some sort of organizational innovation. So at the end of the day, the impact of the platform can even be positive. Of course, a totally different approach is the one of the radical contribution, focusing on a non-competitive type of markets and building on more on a political economy perspective in even a Marxian type of approach, saying that platforms are basically expanding the pool of labor to be exploited, increasing competition among workers. There is a direct and indirect extraction of value, so to use a Marxian type of wording, and so in increasing exploitation. So at the end, you have a negative relation between working condition and platforms. Also, contribution from more sociological industrial relation type of study, labor view, saying that, well, actually platform what does is increasing labor market flexibility, digital precariousness, weakening bargaining power of workers, so labor condition worsening and income vulnerability goes up. Vincenzo here and other scholars from the Scuola Normale Superiore have worked on these issues. Let me say that when we talk about platforms, more with the sociological researchers, they say, okay, but platforms are very different organizational models. And this is true, because of course, if you focus on platforms, they can be online digital markets, or maybe it can be mobile labor market according to the task, if the task is realized totally online, or even in the physical world. So you can have, for instance, Amazon Mechanical Turk and Twago, or maybe helping and take lessons that are very different type of platforms according to the type of task in the physical or virtual world, which means also different type of competencies in terms of workers, because you can have lower skills, like in the case of Amazon Mechanical Turk, but even helping people coming at home and doing cleaning and other stuff, or maybe you can have more higher skill workers and like take lessons in Twago, where you have type of professionists doing some type of jobs, and also platform difference in terms of task allocation strategies, where, for instance, tasks can be allocated by the platforms itself, and so in this case you have platform determined work. Otherwise, you can have tasks allocated by the client, or tasks are allocated by the workers. Each different modality corresponds to a different bargaining power of work, as you can imagine, because if the worker can choose the task, is different when the work is chosen by the platforms, and even this corresponds to different type of payments. Although you have different type of organizational model, at the end you have the same organizational flexibility, because the platforms actually increase the capacity of control. Some authors talk about digital Taylorism, new international division of labor. By the way, platform work directed by the digital platforms allow an extreme organizational flexibility for companies, because they can dispose worker according to different times and objectives. The platform itself has the capacity to organize, control, and direct work, as I said, because you have instruments to verify at any time the positioning and the activity of the worker, to measure the compliance of the work performance against some standards settled by the platforms. Now there is the Digital Act, so maybe we should have more transparency in this respect, but in theory, the platform can measure the compliance of the work performance, and also incentivize in using specific behavior. Let me say that lots of empirical contribution, even in economics, are focused on workers' vulnerability and economic insecurity, so mainly working on individual level data, and also ourselves, we try to dig a little bit in with the available data to try to estimate if actually there is this precarity in platform works, and the channel of precarity are mainly three. Before Kathleen was mentioning this point, in fact, and this can be, I would say, quite transversal. If we see in the global north or global south, we have this type of channels, so low pay, volatility in working hours and wages, because obviously platform workers do not have the possibility to schedule how much they work over time, so this means obviously a volatility in working hours and wages, and privatization of risk, because if they are not employees, basically, they are autonomous workers, or maybe do not have a contract, they don't have a contract. So in this case, there is a shift of the risk from the entrepreneur, from the employer to the employees. Focusing on numbers in Italy, the last INAP, which is a public institute of research run by the Ministry of Labor, says for 2021 that in Italy, official statistics, so it means that migrants are not accounted for, irregular migrants are not there, you have about 1.3% of active population, which means about 600,000 platform workers. For 48% of them, this means the main economic activity, so they earn the main income from this activity in terms of budget. For the 25%, they do not manage its own account, but actually they borrow the account, or there are other type of mechanism. 30% does not have a minimum wage per hour, and 50% they are paid per each assignment. So in the half of the cases, they are not paid for the month or for the hour, but according to each assignment. So let me say that in the last April 2024, the European Commission says in the platform work Act that estimates that the number of platform workers within the Union will rise from 28 million in 2022 to 43 million in 2025. What we did in a previous work with Dario and another colleague, Zachary Parry, was trying to estimate, this is just a descriptive, but of course if you are interested in the paper which has been published on structural change and economic dynamics, we try to see how much this work on the platform is very different compared to be unemployed in terms of income insecurity. And actually we see that the percentage, the incidence of income insecurity by occupation, you see is not very different between platform workers and unemployed. Now, let me say something more on the new line of research, so what we should care about. So the further step is try to monitor the working and labor condition in those companies that depend on the platform. So if there is a techno-economic dependency of firms, as the New York Times was writing in the page, so we should try to check if there is also a channel going toward the labor. The why techno-economic dependency of firms? Well, of course, we know that there are strong power asymmetry between company and platforms, because platforms are gatekeepers. Platforms monopolize key service and can unilaterally enforce changes in contractual competitive conditions. The platform's power is rooted in different features, such as techno-economic features of digital platforms. So companies are locked in the use of that platform. Sometimes they do not have alternatives to sell their product. Basically, or you are on Amazon Workplace or you don't exist. Platforms have peculiar governance and so on. If you're interested, I mean, I will leave the slide so you can go into the detail of this techno-economic dependency. What about data? We have the chance to have developed this peculiar survey, which is a digital platform survey run with the INAP based on a representative sample of 40,000 Italian firms active in 3 sectors that are food and restaurants, tourism and transport. And you see the incidence of, so the share of firms selling through platforms in restaurant left and tourism right, and having more than 50% of their revenues through the platforms. You see there are, I mean, obviously the geographical distribution is very much connected with the tourism specialization of some regions with respect to others. In this graph, we see the percentage of commissions that companies pay to the platforms. And of course, if the relationship is very strong with the platform, so the company receive from the platform more than 50% of their revenue, the average, the median actually, the median of the commission paid for transaction is very high, and is very high for the dark blue line, which is the hospitality sector, with respect to the restaurant, where also in the restaurant we have at least 20% of transaction paid to the platform, in terms of commission paid to the platforms. What about the relation with work? So if there is, our argument is, if there is a techno-economic dependency of this company, of the Italian companies in these very peculiar sectors, so let's try to estimate if these companies are transmitting this vulnerability to their own workers. And in fact, from a descriptive point of view, we see that there is actually an increasing share of temporary and precarious contract with respect to the others in those companies that the blue bar are more dependent on platforms in terms of their selling, in terms of selling their products. In terms of average wage, this is also true if we focus on the hospitality, in the sense that the average wage paid in the hospitality sector is a little bit lower if the company work exclusively through the platforms with respect to the other company in the same sector. Let me say that we try also to estimate that relationship, putting into the equation some controls, so controlling for several characteristics, and it seems that this association is still there in the hospitality sector. So a positive association between use of digital platform and share of non-standard work. If we focus on the subscription of unilateral condition by the company selling their product to the platform, we see that this is also true for the restaurant sector and also for the hospitality. But the hospitality also, the negotiated conditions are there. They have a positive association with the share of non-standard work. So, going to the conclusion, I was very quick, but if you are curious, of course, we will share with you more material on that. The spread of platforms has a significant impact on work, often accelerating the process of fragmentation and precariousness. From a regulation point of view, we know that in April there was the EU Parliament adopted platforms work directive, saying that now there are new rules to correct false self-employment and new rules on the algorithmic management, also new rules on transparency and data protection. But pay attention, because what we saw from the past is that platforms adapt to the regulatory framework, so the law, and shape their organizational models to reply to the change in terms of regulation. So we should try to monitor that. Also, let me say, potential unsolved issues, irregular migrants, digital slavery. In the case of care sector, we were talking before with Kathleen at lunch, where actually there are no need for means of production, because people working in the care sector, obviously they can be even very poor because they come at home, they do not need means of production. In some cases they are asylum seekers, so at least for Italy, so we need to also monitor and to consider that the citizenship rights need to be extended if you don't want that these people actually are not covered by the implementation of the work directive at the European level. Third point, the directive, but also consider the story of the loss of independence by small-scale producers, so platforms mediate work previously carried out independently or in small-scale businesses. Need to monitor this indirect form of exploitation. Our analysis said that indicators of job quality goes down, so specifically in the tourist sector, where the dependency is very high for the hotels and so on. So in this case, platforms may drive business to increase the use of flexible contracts. And let me say that we have also a specific project on this issue with Sapienza and Bocconi, which is named the title Living and Working Conditions in the Digital Economy in Italy and the European Union. So if you are curious, we can chat about that, talk about that later. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Valeria. A very rich summary of problems. You can switch the position. The challenges for research and for policy. Interestingly enough, the EU directives appear to be the main reference points for many of these challenges. I give the floor now to Dario Guarascio, professor at Sapienza University of Rome, focusing on the labor impact of artificial intelligence for a complementary presentation. Dario.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm extremely grateful to be here. So thanks, Guglielmo and Mario, first of all. So let's move to the labor impact of AI. Let me skip this. So the first thing that I think it is worth asking is that if we are again in the same old controversy, so to say, because when we ask what could be the labor impact of AI, some of the old songs concerning the technology employment nexus come back to the fore. So are we witnessing a battle between optimists and pessimists on this matter? Should we expect that in the end, the market mechanism and restatement effects, as for example, Acemoglu and Restrepo talked about with respect to robotization, will in the end offset potential AI disruptive effects? are we going to see, in fact, mostly productivity-enhancing effects at the workplace level of AI technologies? Well, this should be seen, on the one hand, because we don't have enough empirical evidence, as I will show, but on the other hand, even the mainstream perspective underlines the fact that there are some major discontinuities, starting with the fact that AI is going to impact high-level abilities and occupations that so far we thought were shielded by the potential disruptive effects of technology. But there are many elements that are missing in the mainstream perspective. Here we would like to highlight more political economy elements which are relevant for the discussion, and some of those things have been already raised. Power asymmetries, I will come to this in a minute. A new kind of dominant business model that is based on surveillance and data harnessing with all its consequences, and concerning labor, increasing fragmentation and potential precarization, as Valeria already shown. So we should ask also if we are not witnessing all contradictions wearing a new technological dress. And to set a little bit the theoretical stage, Mario taught us at length about how complex and heterogeneous the relationship between technology and labor market is. So first of all, we need to ask ourselves which is the strategic aim according to which AI is introduced within a productive process. Is it a process, organizational and innovation aimed at reducing costs? Well, if this is the case, we may have substitution, technological unemployment. We may have fragmentation and weakening of workers' bargaining power, offshoring and externalization of parts of the production process, as we have seen and as it is happening also in services with artificial intelligence. But again, even if this is the main aim of the introduction of technology, then we can have restatement effects, price-based compensation channels that may mitigate or offset these effects. But on the other hand, the aim could also be the one of introducing new and more advanced products, enlarging markets, technological competitiveness that may have a positive impact on employment if no business stealing effects are in place. Of course, impact is heterogeneous across jobs and tasks, and new jobs may come about due to the new technological wave that we are witnessing. And again, this may mean stable or increasing employment. But we talked at length about concentration of power, which is also concentration in markets. And this may mean monopoly toward customers, monopsony in terms of labor demand. And again, this can have a negative impact or second-order negative impacts. With Jelena Relic and Roman Stollinger, we summed up a bit of the empirical literature. There is a paper, if you are interested, on the AI impact of employment. Just few words. First of all, plenty of different indicators leading towards different outcomes. But unfortunately, none of these indicators is very satisfactory in the sense that none of these is about the actual introduction and use of these technologies. These are mostly proxies, and the most used, we also use these proxies, are occupation-based ones, telling us how much occupations are exposed, so potentially associated to the introduction of these technologies. This is, of course, important, but we miss a very important part of the story. What are the findings so far? Well, slightly or no effects or slightly positive effects of these proxies, of course, and we don't know what will be the very outcome when we will have more sound data in this regard. Let me also show you some results of recent research with Jelena Relic on European occupations. Just take into consideration that the literature so far is very much US-centric, so few papers on the European case. We try to estimate the impact of AI exposure on European employment. And as you can see, these are the top 10 most exposed AI occupations. We have some usual suspects like general office clerks, numerical clerks, so occupations which were at risk during the previous digitalization waves. But as you can see, top-level occupations are now within the list of the most exposed. Here we are not saying that these guys are at risk of being substituted, because these indicators are mostly silent about which is the main effect that we should expect, but still this is something relevant to be observed. And you have also the list of the least exposed, but I leave this to the paper for those of you who are interested. There is also an element of territorial heterogeneity, which is very important. It's also related to platforms to a certain extent. But what we see is that the diffusion of these technologies, and so also the expected labor impact, is all but homogeneous. So large cities, high-tech areas, so areas where large firms and high-tech productions are mostly localized. We try to estimate these econometrically, and interestingly enough, we're quite very much in line with the existing evidence so far. So even in the European case, we tend to find a relatively positive association between employment dynamics and exposure to artificial intelligence. But when we interact the artificial intelligence indicator with the robot density indicator, the sign turns negative. So again, there is some very important sources of heterogeneity that need to be more thoroughly investigated. So the third point that I would like to make is the following, and I anticipated it in the introduction. So if we stop to the dominant and mainstream literature on the employment impact of AI, what we see is that we are mostly focusing on this substitution vis-a-vis complementarity effects, barely significant and often positive effects of AI, given what the literature is telling us, but many problems. Technology in its infancy, theoretical and empirical limitations, in particular empirical one related to the indicators that I just listed before. But then there is another fundamental part of the story, which is a fundamental part of the discussion today. So the fact that AI exacerbates the concentration of techno-economic power that we already listened to by Kathy and during Valeria's presentation. A concentration of techno-economic power which has geopolitical implication, which is of course related to large platforms, which means that there is a market concentration and the techno-economic dependency vis-a-vis other firms, and this is reflected also in how the pool of labor that is interested by digital-related exploitation enlarges, and there is a growing dynamics of fragmentation. AI can be considered a novel outsourcing tool, even in services, and there are algorithmic management practices that have been already mentioned that can further unbalance capital-labor relationships. Just to give you some number about how much polarized is technological power in the AI domain, and this is a fundamental element because this is re-magnifying the power of big tech, which are basically those controlling the frontier of this technology. This is the list of companies owning foundational models, so the fundamental Gen AI models, and as you can see, the usual suspects are all there and are basically controlling all the bunch of models that are behind the generative AI that we are discussing about today. Of course, this is also a geographical and geopolitical polarization. And another interesting graph, these are all coming from the AI index report produced by the University of Stanford with many partners. And as you can see here, you have both the names of the companies, so Google, Meta, Microsoft, of course, there is Amazon and OpenAI. But what you can see is that as more the models become powerful, flexible, and performative, the higher the training costs, and so the resources and the capabilities needed to make them work. But this means that the power of those having such capabilities increases too, okay? And this is very much in line with what Margaret O'Mara has recently written on foreign policy in a brilliant article entitled Big Tech But Bigger, where she states, well, yes, the AI boom is fueling a new wave of startups, but unfortunately, those startups are navigating on the back of technologies owned by big techs, which are the only ones having superabundance of data, computing powers, and the funds needed to put forward these models. And there is also an interesting historical element, because if we compare the current AI moment with the historical phase at the beginning of the internet in the early 90s, what we have now is that we have key corporations dominating in a quite isolated way most of the R&D, most of the patents, most of the competencies and the knowledge needed to push the frontier forward, which was not exactly the case at the beginning of the internet. And this is also something quite interesting. So very briefly, because this is something that has been touched upon by Valeria, but I would like to send you a message that when we discuss about the economic, societal, and labor impact of AI, we should think at a kind of two-faced coin. So on the one hand, there is the problem of growing concentration of techno-economic power. On the other hand, the labor impact, which can be seen looking at complementary versus substitution effect, but also acknowledging the political economy element, including the growing fragmentation and unbalancedness of capital-labor relationship. And AI-related microwork is a very telling example. You were discussing before about content moderation and these kind of activities. Well, we should think that when we use ChatGPT or this kind of tools, well, behind this there is a large pool of highly fragmented, scattered, and in many cases super exploited labor that, interestingly enough, is in many cases localized in countries like Venezuela and Colombia, where you have the combination of a good level of schooling, no alternatives from an economic point of view, and a good internet connection. And so you will discover that some interesting and not so well-known platform providing services to the AI, let's say, leaders, organized hundreds of thousands of workers in these places where they are 10 hours per day in front of the screen, training algorithm and controlling that they are operating in a proper way. So the final point concerns what we are discussing and writing about with Mario, with Andrea, Claudio, and other colleagues, which is the military digital industrial complex. Why this is related with the labor impact of AI and with platforms? Well, because one of the key points that we discussed in a 2 years ago paper about the drivers of the power of platforms is in fact the fact that the boundaries between the state, and in particular its military apparatus, and companies dominating these technologies are more and more blurred. And among other things, government and their military apparatus are more and more reliant on these companies for critical infrastructures and technologies. And AI is, of course, one of the key elements. There is a paper that you can download. The title is Blurring Boundaries, and you will find plenty of data documenting the mutual dependency between platforms and the military apparatus. This is just one of the graphs that you will find there. But of course, AI is also at the center of the discussion about what the technology is for, who controls technology, and I mean, how much the development that we are observing also from a geopolitical and military point of view are related to problems of power concentration from an economic point of view. And so, just to list the set of challenges for the governance of AI that I think can be a good food for thought for the final discussion that we are going to have, who set the rules of the game and who drives the technological frontier? Because of course regulation is key, but if the ownership of technology, the pace of its development, the understanding of the knowledge that is behind this is very much concentrated, well then these can be problematic also for implementing the regulation. So basically these are the key points, and I leave this to the final discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dario. I think we are really developing a picture which is highly integrated between the different dimensions in terms of policy and in terms of economic and political effects. We now conclude the presentation with one of our PhD students, Stefano Tortorici, who is working on a little potential rosier picture, that is the way in which cooperatives can organize, plan and run the digital platforms. He is carrying out a detailed survey. You have to squeeze in 15 minutes not just your hopes, but also the evidence that you are building. Stefano.
Can you hear me? Yes. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back, and thank you, Mario and Guglielmo, for having also me. I'm going to talk to you about the preliminary results of this survey on the identities, evolution, and challenges of platform cooperatives. That includes, that collect answers from like the managers and co-founders of these companies. But I'm gonna touch a little bit also upon the theory of platform cooperatives, and I'm gonna end my presentation with a bit of pessimism, with some preliminary results from my fieldwork. So we have talked already a lot about digital capitalism. You all know that it's worsening capitalism. We have talked about oligopoly with Luca and the fact that it's producing huge wealth accumulation. Just to give you a data, 1 week ago, the biggest 5 companies in the world, all active in artificial intelligence and as platforms, were worth in financial markets $14 trillion of US dollars. And we have seen also with Valeria, but also with Kathleen, about the precarity and the terrible workers' conditions of platform workers all around the world. To answer Mario's questions, what are the actors that I see that are trying to countervail platform power? I see, we've seen like the emergence of social movements and unions trying to go against the terrible worker conditions of platforms. We have seen university projects like the Fair Work at the Oxford Internet Institute that tries to lever on consumers and companies to improve platform workers' conditions. We have seen the debate at European level with the Platform Work Directive and other legislative attempts. But since the beginning of the web, we've seen the emergence of solidarity techs like digital commons, platform cooperatives, and more recently, decentralized autonomous organizations, basically organizations based on blockchain technology. I'd like to introduce you platform cooperatives, distinguishing them by the broader social movement that we can define platform cooperativism. Of course, this duality is inherited by the same history of cooperativism, many social movements that are based on this form of democratic enterprise. Like platform cooperativism could be identifiable thanks to the directory of the Platform Cooperatives Consortium, that is like the think tank and the network of all these platform cooperatives around the world, that is based at the New School of New York and counts 638 projects in 53 countries of the world. However, no one really knows how many enterprises, platform cooperatives are in the world, their dimensions, and one of the reasons of the survey was exactly that. With platform cooperatives that were firstly defined in 2014, we mean usually digital platforms, and with platform we mean digital firms that intermediate at least 2 kinds of users, with 2 main features. A broad-based ownership, usually among workers and users, and the democratic governance principle that make them elect their managers through the rule of 1 member, 1 vote. After the results of the survey, we could say that at least from their perception, they could be over 100 in the world, so many less than the 638 projects that compose the platform cooperatives movement. To give you a more concrete example, this is the Drivers Cooperative, is my case study. In May 2021, the New York Times was titling, "A worker-owned cooperative tries to compete with Uber and Lyft." At the time, the 3 co-founders that you can see down here, Alyssa Orlando, Ken Lewis, Eric Foreman, have recruited 2,500 drivers in New York City and have launched the first app. 3 years later, from media coverage and their website, we discovered that they have recruited 12,000 drivers in New York City, more than the 15% of the labor force of taxi drivers in the city. They've opened a new branch in Denver, Colorado, and they would probably open another branch in Minneapolis soon, after that Uber and Lyft left the city after the city hall increased the minimum wage. So what's really captured my interest about platform cooperatives and what I'm trying to do more broadly on my PhD project is really trying to understand how they can be an alternative to platform capitalist firms, improving working conditions while growing and pushing alternative values into the market. And I always argue that they have still to prove to be able to overcome traditional problem of cooperative enterprises. So I'm focusing mostly on 5 questions that address and trying to understand how they are trying to grow without losing their alternative values, how they can grow solving the capital conundrum, so the financial problem, keeping a truly democratic management, guaranteeing proper working conditions, and at the same time answering the new challenge of profiting from data. But before that, and this is like the aim of the survey, I'm trying to understand their space, their dimensions and numbers. And in the end, I will also try to grasp their trajectories and trying to understand if they are thriving, fading, or whatever. So all these questions were addressed by this international survey that is very small compared to the one that were presented before, but it was pre-tested almost 1 year ago in August 2023. Its final versions contains 46 questions organized in 5 sections addressing the identity, the workforce, the finance, the governance, and challenges of these platform cooperatives. Before diffusing the survey, I preselected over 200 organizations of interest from the literature and the directory of the Platform Cooperatives Consortium. And finally, on the 6th of March, I've diffused it through a mailing list with over 150 mails, through the main social media, contacting directly leading scholars and federation, and granularly looking for co-founders. I would say that this last action was the most important to reach 83 respondents registered legally in all the continents of the world. We can see that they are mainly registered in the global north with USA, France, Canada, Spain, UK. However, this geography radically changed if we take in consideration the geography of activities that these platforms do. So just when platform cooperatives declare to be active in 85 countries of the world. However, out of these 83, not all can be defined as platform cooperatives, not even from their perception. So on the base of 3 main questions that I have in the survey, I selected 45 among those who define themselves as being primarily platforms, with the definition that we've seen before, and to follow the ICA 7 principles that usually define the cooperative identity. And further, I am trying to distinguish between those who are actual platform cooperatives, so they carry their interactions primarily through the platforms, and those who are potentially platform cooperatives. So they do not yet intermediate primarily online. So to be clear, the data that I'm going to show you after this slide comes from this 54% of potential and actual platform cooperatives. The other realities can be defined as part of the platform cooperatives movement, but they cannot be defined from their perception to be real platform cooperatives. In terms of geography, the map would be very similar. In terms of history, we see that the age of these platforms is very, very young. They've mainly registered in the last 12 years, mostly in the last 5, with a rapid increase between the 2018 and 2021. In terms of activities, they are mainly active in food delivery, riders and driver sectors, marketplace, software development, transport data. In terms of values, they ranked first to be in favor of workers' empowerment, to try to push cooperative values, empower local communities, but also environmental sustainability. In terms of dimensions, they are almost all very small, with revenue in 2023 between 0 and 50,000 US dollars, but we have also some considerable number, kind of 8, that have revenue in 2023 for over 1 million of US dollars. These dimensions are confirmed if we look at the labor force. Most of them employ between not more than 20 workers for pay, while there are also a considerable number that employ between 20 and 49 and to more than 50 workers for pay. In terms of challenges, and this is interesting, at least looking at the first theorists of platform cooperatives that were probably too optimistic about the financial problem, most of them point out to the limited access to finance as their main problem, followed by the limited markets for selling services and goods and the limited participation of co-members. So these are just few data. What I'm trying to do next is to look more closely to 4 main dimensions. So their economic dimensions, their cooperative identity, their organizations, and their use of the digital mean, in order to proceed to a cluster analysis and a first typology grounded on data of platform cooperatives. But to give you a closer look, this is the number 13, is a software development platform, is a worker cooperatives, primarily composed by members and owners of the platform. They had revenue for $12 million, more than 50 workers, 121 members, and 750 transactions in 2023. They are based also on blockchain, and they have a very interesting blockchain governance mechanism that gives slightly more power to those workers who work more for the platform. Instead, this is the number 40, is the one active in 85 countries of the world, has had revenue in 2023 for $18 million US dollars, between 20 and 49 workers for pay, 1,900 members, 12,000 transactions, and it's a multi-stakeholder cooperative active in the stock media sector, but it's primarily composed by wedged employees. Of course, this is a partial picture. The complete one can only be obtained looking more closely to the case study, doing probably qualitative in-depth research. So we discovered, for example, looking more closely that the drivers cooperative have recruited 12,000 drivers, but in terms of labor force in full employment equivalent, they have between 50 and 100 drivers per week. They do not use the platform because despite good financial investments, several millions, still it has bugs. They are shrinking in revenue and labor force. They are facing governance problems. They are currently writing a new bylaw, and they also complain sometimes a bit the participation of members. But bringing a little bit of sun and optimism, the experience of the drivers cooperative has inspired many more drivers cooperative in the US, and not only. Also right now in the state of New York is in debate a law in the Senate to fund environmental conversion of taxi cabs, so they could be a leverage for institutional change. And despite all the governance problem, they really are a worker-owned cooperative. So 3 angles that I think would be very interesting to look at in the near future is really to understand how do the challenges of platform cooperatives mirror capitalist platforms' features. So reversing a little bit the perspective. But also I would like to apply the power resource theory framework, trying to assess how platform cooperatives can improve the platform workers' conditions. And what I wanted to leave you with is really that I think that they constitute a good case study to really think in a constructive way to the possible solutions to make solidarity tech thrive. So thank you, comments are more than welcome, and thank you so much.
Well, this was an interesting ending note, and I open the floor to questions, comments, clarifications. Take the microphone here. Luca.
Prova. Okay. So thank you very much to everybody. I found your talks really inspiring. I have one question for everybody. I would like to know the opinion of everybody, especially Dario and Stefano, because what impressed me particularly is the finding that AI polarize the techno power. That is because of this is probably an inner mechanism of our economics, a mechanism. But AI enforces and amplifies the polarization mechanism, or the accumulation of power into few hands. Let's say. I would like to know your thoughts about possible solutions to that. So how can we overcome that? In particular, I see 2 possible ways. Well, 3. The first one is to make this platform public. That is, we know that these platforms are very impactful. One possible old-fashioned solution is to make them completely public to control them better. The other one is more in the direction suggested by Stefano, that is decentralization, cooperation, coordination. The other one is, more strict, that is, we cannot control these platforms. They drive our society towards a situation we don't like, so we stop them directly. For example, ChatGPT, we don't know what is the impact, we cannot control, we stop them. So I would like to have your thoughts about these solutions in terms of feasibility, desirability, why not, environmental impact and societal impact. Thank you.
Give the floor to you now.
Thank you. Tanya Kershavan from University of Ljubljana. So a little bit related maybe also to the question we just heard. I have a regulatory background, so I'm coming from the sphere of media regulation. And that's why I'm a little bit familiar to the current fragmentation of this regulatory landscape, which I think is becoming even more complex now when we have certain regulatory authorities that already are converged, already maybe like here in Italy, or already 2 decades ago, they followed this trend of converging media authorities together with telecom authorities. And then we have some authorities now taking over responsibilities in digital arena and reforming themselves into online safety regulatory authorities, or also being responsible, as we have the case, as is the case in France, responsible also for copyright issues. So all this variety in this sphere, and how helpful it is, for enforcement of this currently emerging European regulatory framework, and whether we see some way forward, how regulatory authorities should evolve to keep the pace with this incredible digital developments in the sphere. Many of them already are trying to deploy some solutions based on artificial intelligence also in their regulatory practices. So I don't know whether we will end with artificial intelligence regulating artificial intelligence at the end of the day. And that also brings us to the beginning of this afternoon discussion when someone mentioned autophagy. So maybe someone could reflect on that. Thank you.
More questions? Penso?
Yes, thanks to all presenters. Question for Valeria. So it's very interesting, this data you showed about this worsening of labor conditions in those firms which are dependent on platforms. So I had 2 questions there. One, what do you think are exactly the transmission mechanism there? So why exactly do you think that these firms which are more dependent on platforms end up having more precarious contracts? Is this because they're squeezed on costs, for instance, because they have to pay the fees and therefore they end up using more precarious contract to contrast this? And then it was interesting to see the difference between hospitality and restaurants, because I guess that those are 2 kind of different platforms as well, no? I mean, restaurants, I guess, is Deliveroo or Foodora or whatever, and they also do labor intermediation. Hospitality, is it booking, this kind of, which do not do labor intermediation at all. So I was wondering if then there is some sectorial differences or not, like in that sense.
I have a question to the regulatory aspects by that this legislation, it seems to be very much protective, the hard law, which is journalism. Role of journalism. And what I, however, see as a potential effect here is currency of and that the ideal outcome here would be that we have a kind of rank, more or less trustworthy becomes quite helpful for users and might also correspond to particular demands of users. I wonder here much this new legislation, despite of being protective, might also be able to empower journalism and also users correspond actually also to demands of journalism that through content profitable business models.
So I have a couple of questions actually. I try to be brief. So the first one is about digital platforms. And so what I understood from this framework, we like this picture we try to sketch today, is that basically the way digital platforms grew in the last years, it's from an economic point of view, is like it's very similar to monopolies, or they are actually monopolies. So an economist, so I don't know. I'm asking you. And so how this actually compatible with the kind of society we live in, democratic societies, and if they actually present an arm to this kind of system, like a democratic system, we are still trying to build actually. And what is, with respect to this, what is the role of like antitrust regulations actually? Because like from my very little knowledge, I know that that is the one that is supposed to take control and regulate this kind of phenomenon. So I'm curious to know how this actually works in this case. And the second question is actually about the military use of AI. And so I know this is a bit tricky field, especially for academia. So I don't even know if I can really try to formulate a good question about it. But basically, as a researcher in AI, and I often ask myself, like, what is even just simply what is the role of scientific research in this field? Because what should we, like, I know what are the potentiality of AI. I know also what is happening, for example, with the lavender system in Gaza, and what as a person that knows about this should do. How can we not prevent? Not even. I don't know. I really don't know, because I know that for the military there is a completely different regulation, and like in academia we usually don't talk about that kind of regulations because they tell us that it's not our field of in the world. So, but actually at the end we have these dual use technologies that actually enter the military field, and we don't know about it. As you said, it's a bit blurring. There is a blurring, and say a bit more about this.
Thank you, Kathleen. Then we give the floor to.
So I think this is a question mostly, I think, for Dario, about the military, about the blurring of the connection between your military digital industrial complex, and the kind of blurring of lines between the military and these tech companies. And of course, so like from a U.S. perspective, that was there was always a pretty strong connection. The whole internet and a lot of these innovations coming out of Lincoln Labs and Livermore. How would you characterize the difference between that connection at that time and the connection now? If I'm kind of reading between the lines, is it that you're seeing at a kind of a role reversal, whereas the military was feeding these companies in the first analysis, and now they're kind of like in the driver's seat vis-a-vis the military and by extension the American state. So that's my question.
Thank you. I give the floor, go in the same order. So Sofia first. You want to add something later?
Ok, scusate. Okay, so quickly, maybe I start from Hans' question on the. So just quickly 2 points. One on this idea of ranking trustworthy sources. Personally, I'm really doubtful about this concept, what is trustworthy, what not, who decides what's trustworthy, etc. But so one consideration is that still, I'm also optimistic about the fact that in general the EU is trying to regulate this field, even if legislation will always come after real-world advancements. This is an oxymoron that I'm not sure we will be able to solve soon. But so there is a clash between public interest objectives and profit-oriented objectives that is still there. So why would these tech companies want to prioritize public interest sources or trustworthy sources over other sources that generate more revenues in general? And with regards to empowering of users, okay, we have this opt-out system and this old transparency kit, which though demand literate audience. So there is this whole question of digital media literacy that is still open for audiences to be able to be really receivers of these updates. I hope I was clear. For Tanya, about media and converging authorities, I think what is needed is what we are trying to do in this room today. So trying to be interdisciplinary, to avoid having authorities where mainly lawyers or other categories of with a single backgrounds are there, but to involve IT specialists and data analysts, engineers, whoever can, give a 360 degrees perspective on AI and its challenges.
Yeah, I would like to add some thoughts on your question, Luca, which is very relevant and very difficult, of course, to answer. Let's say whether AI governance might lead to further polarization. In a sense, I think that the DSA might indeed bring more polarization in between European policymakers and platforms, because basically DSA is based on the premise of a certain degree of trust, because in effect are platforms that assess and mitigate the systemic risks, are platforms who decide which data is provided to researchers, if any. And so there is this issue of trust. And I wonder whether the transparency kit that Sofia was highlighting would be sufficient to somewhat mitigate the harms of recommender systems, which are the engine of platforms. And I'm not sure about it. And I also wonder whether penalties and fines will be enough to incentivize platforms to comply with the rules. So I think about the extreme case in which platforms are not actually trustable and suspicions would increase over time. There is an article of the DSA which is not much discussed, which is Article 69, which is power to conduct inspections. Basically, the Commission has the power to go into the companies and check all the records, all their data centers, in certain specific cases, of course. But in general, this in conjunction also with, for example, the whistleblowing platform that has been created for the DSA, but also for the DMA. and also with the fact that there is an office in San Francisco that has been also created at the end of 2022. So it seems that the stage is set in the case there will be, the trust will be undermined, and there will be unintended consequences. I don't know, maybe this would push the European policymakers to change the strategy and start to consider a public social media. I don't know this, but...
Very difficult question. On Luca's suggestion, actually we were talking during lunch even con Kathleen. Maybe I will push for a public infrastructure in a specific sector. I don't know if it makes sense, but I would try to have a sectoral approach, so safeguarding, I don't know, health, education. Because, for instance, in terms of, if you think in a university, we use specific platforms. So why even for specific sectors such as even health, we do not have a public cloud if it is reliable, if we can do that. Although, of course, at the beginning this will have a lot of cost, and also in terms of efficiency will not the best. But maybe we will try to go in this direction. In terms of decentralization, I like, the story that Stefano was saying. I was myself also doing at the beginning some research on this, but what I learned is that a lot of these cooperative, they do not have instruments to have autonomous algorithms. And so at the end, they cannot manage so much these, unless they put together different pieces, such as the case of CoopCycle, I think. This is a big network of cooperatives doing this in France. They have their own engineers and this stuff. So, and in fact, there are also in Latin America, FATIC, which is a red very much connected with CoopCycles. And so I think this is a good story in terms of movement and also awareness of workers. But in terms of technology, these cooperatives face very strong difficulties. In this sense, this brings me a little bit to the solution of a public intervention. So try to build, in terms of state, the capability to do something different, at least in a core specific sector. So I will go for a sectoral approach. For concerning to the issue raised by Vincenzo, well, the transmission mechanism, we thought this can be a sudden increasing in cost. So at the beginning, maybe the company, for the firm, it makes sense to sell through the platforms, even in terms of revenues. In fact, I didn't explain very much, but we did also an interaction term with the change in revenues. So the idea, and in that sense, we were building a little bit on the theoretical framework of Martin Kenny and Daniele Cuto, when the firms get some revenues because they are on the top of the Amazon marketplace. So then the platform change the condition of the contract and say, okay, well done, now you have to pay more fees. And so our idea, if it makes sense, maybe company decide to have a little bit of margins of operation, having like a precarious contract, because that you can have less labor costs on that side, or maybe you can dismiss a labor if you have to this change in the cost that you face. So this can be one. So basically changing unilaterally the condition and suddenly can impact the relationship. We will do better tests, of course, on that. And in this theoretical framework, the time is very relevant, in the sense that it depends very much how long you stay on the platforms and in which time the platforms actually can change the conditions. So if maybe at the beginning can be also useful for each single company, but as time goes by, the situation worsens. In fact, there are several stories from this point of view. When even the platforms, if you as a company has introduced very good innovation on or maybe different products, so the platform stole basically the idea and like ABBA books and sold by autonomously. And indeed, what you said in terms of sectoral difference is very interesting. In fact, we saw in hospitality techno-economic dependency much more developed with respect to restaurant, but just maybe because the platforms, the organization of the platform, I mean, is a little bit different. One of the advantage of the survey is that actually we can focus on the name of the platforms, because at some point of the questions of the questionnaire, the company can specify on which kind of platform they sell their products and so on. So maybe we can do a little bit of work on that, trying to link it better with the organizational model of the platforms to be more convincing in the story. Thanks.
Yeah, very briefly. Thank you. Very excellent question. Let me start from Kathy. Well, of course, I mean, what we argue in the paper is that you have both elements of continuity, because, of course, we have seen the integration of the industry and the military and the state even before. However, there are elements of discontinuity, including the kind of knowledge and infrastructures and technologies that these companies tend to control, and so the kind of reliance from the state and the military point of view. We have also, I would say, another element is to think at, unfortunately, at the fact that how much some of these big techs with respect with AI technologies are now involved on the battlefield, both in Ukraine, in Gaza. I mean, from an innovation point of view, this is something very relevant, because the development and the refinement of frontier technologies is very much about having a test bed where to try and implement and refine technologies. It's terrible to say, but having access to contexts where you can push the frontier of technology, which are about image, sound recognition, and automatic operations, is something that for companies staying on the frontier is very, very relevant. Of course, these are not the only elements of mutual dependency. And another point to answer properly to your question is that what we argue is that there is a kind of pendulum relationship. So if in the beginning you have that the R&D and the long-term research activities of agencies like DARPA have been crucial to set the stage and to transfer the initial radical technologies, well, then these companies became vectors to experiment and develop incremental innovations that in some cases became radical innovations, but this allowed them to become, let's say, owner and developer of very unique capabilities. And so I think that this is a road that is not necessarily new, but deserves to be investigated with respect to the very specific characteristics of digital technologies. And then I just reply to your question. Well, are platform monopolies? Yeah, to a significant extent they are, but I would say that what we discussed today tell us that they are much more than monopolies. They vindicate traditions of thought like the monopoly capital tradition, Baran, Sweezy, other authors, which focused on how much companies, when they are large and transnational, are able to orchestrate and control the economic space and in some cases society at large, as we have heard today. So in this case, the microeconomic tools dealing with monopolies and oligopolies perhaps are not enough to understand, and then perhaps are not enough to act via a regulation that is tailored on this kind of understanding of the economy. So I'm not saying that the monopoly-related toolbox is not useful and important to understand what is happening, but perhaps a more broad political economy approach is more effective to figure out what's going on and perhaps design actions that I won't talk about because most have been already said.
Thank you. Very quick. I would ask also Kathleen to have the final word in a moment.
Very Luca's question is a fundamental and complex one, so very two brief points before giving the floor to Kathleen. I will not go back to Ludis for sure. Platforms and artificial intelligence have, of course, kind of positive externalities. And I would refuse the dichotomy between public and cooperatives. I would say that these two options can get along and foster each other in a positive ways. And well, of course, there is also the environmental questions and so on. But I would say that, I don't know, cooperatives, of course, there is the question of power, and I would say that cooperatives could be a way and a tool that might help to regain power and put these kind of countervailing platforms on the agenda back again. That's it.
So first, thank you so much. This has been such a really stimulating day. Really, I learned a tremendous amount. I think my role was to say like what the paths forward are. I'm not sure I have a very good answer to that. I will say that Sofia's talk reminded me of how of the stronger regulatory push that's being done with the at the European level, and I think that goes back to a couple of different things. One is just that it's administrative, and you can actually implement. You decide policies, you can actually implement them, as opposed to the United States, where the FTC tries to do things, and then it has to go before a judiciary that is absolutely hostile to these kinds of regulatory efforts. And so, just the difference between a sort of straight administrative regulatory apparatus and a regulatory apparatus that runs mostly through litigation, because it's through litigation that these companies are able to like run out the clock. Basically, yeah, you win a case against these guys, but in fact they appeal, and then 10 years later you might be able to do something. The other thing that I think your talk really reminded me of is that it's a much more proactive. I think you're right, Marco. Is it Marco who was saying that? I'm not sure, how effective these, the enforcement. Clearly, the enforcement is really the key thing. It's not just passing these regulations, but again, from an American perspective, if I'm not mistaken, the Digital Markets Act, would impose. First of all, it put it back on the platforms to demonstrate that they were in compliance, as opposed to chasing around after these guys to check up on them. Although that's a good thing to have in your back pocket too. But the other thing is that the fines were actually really significant. If I'm not mistaken, we're talking about 10% of global revenue. I mean, that's something that even a company like Google is going to like take notice of and pay attention to. It's not like these, a couple of $1 trillion or a couple of $1 billion. But then honestly, also listening to, so I think that's a really key part of it, is a proactive administrative regulatory apparatus that is sort of on top of these things. But also, especially listening to Valeria's reminder of the many secondary effects, these second order effects, the kind of knock-on effects. It's not just that these companies, that platform firms, for example, are bad for their own employees, rather they have these knock-on effects. And, I can only confirm that because, once Amazon took over the retail market in the United States, everybody, even your local bookstore, had to now start delivering things within 2 days, because that became the industry standard, right? And so in a world like that, simply regulating the platforms, while important, is going to kind of fall short. And so then I'm just brought back to, especially on platforms, the really key role played by countervailing forces. And of course, the main countervailing force that we should be looking to and relying on and empowering is labor. And in the United States, that requires like radical labor law reform. Here it requires also labor law reform, but not maybe so radical as in the United States. But also, one of the things, and I'm not sure how much I want to sort of like put my hat on this, but I will say that in a lot of my work on these platforms, another of the countervailing powers that actually mattered in some of these cases was organized employers, like organized employers who really had no interest in some company coming in, especially some company gaining market share by going around the rules. In the case of Uber in Germany, for example, it was really not labor. It was actually organized business that really rallied and said, no, we've got a regulated market. We regulate the market, but everybody, it's a level playing field, and they're not really interested in having a big sort of would-be monopolist come in, especially taking advantage of regulatory gray zones. So those two legs, it would be like the sort of empowered administrative regulatory apparatus, but really, really, really super important for these knock-on secondary effects, just sort of empowering these secondary or these countervailing forces in society that could also pushback. So, I mean, I don't know, that's not really solutions, but they're like steps toward a solution, maybe.
Thank you very much. Let me conclude with the two things. The first one is that this is a step in an ongoing trajectory of work that we are carrying out here in Florence and Pisa at the Scuola Normale. In late October, we may have a bigger conference with the same range of themes being addressed within the framework of the FAIR project. And we have PhD students and other activities going on. And we really value the interaction and the interdisciplinary perspective. I think this was really something that we, each of us in his or her own field of activity is missing when there is no such a variety of voices. A final point on the policy learning process. I think Kathleen in her Ciampi lecture was talking about the historical antecedent to Amazon with the concentration of retail industry in the US at the beginning of the 20th century. I think we really need to learn from historical antecedents of disruptive technologies. And if we think at the beginning of the late 19th, early 20th century, the way in which large-scale industry with steel, oil, and telecommunication companies were reshaping the world, starting from the US, we had a number of solutions that shaped the world of the 20th century. First of all, the outcomes, what came out was the outcome of very strong political and economic and social struggles. Roosevelt being fought by business, the antitrust laws being fought by Standard Oil and so on. So we are missing this now. So paradoxically, in a context when everyone is connected and the trade-off that the digital monopolies have done is I give you for free email, social media, and so on, and you don't bother with my power, with what I do with your data. So I think this is an interesting question that has to be, without a major conflict between political power, social actors, countervailing forces, there will be no way to contain the emerging monopoly power. The historical experience have been very interesting, and Luca was pointing some things. In Europe, state-owned industries were the answer in most cases. In steel, in oil, in telecommunication, all 90% of European countries, the solution was the creation of a state-owned industry, which was solving the trade-off between opportunities of technology, economies of scale, but also policy priorities, coherence with different policy goals, diffusion of new technologies, access to electricity, and so on. So the state-owned model of firms in Europe was a dominant answer to all the technological challenges of the past century. In the US, the answer was antitrust, the splitting of Standard Oil, the splitting of steel, and so on. And this is Elizabeth Warren was proposing, and clearly this is something that we have been missing in the US. The paradox of your discussion is that we are talking about European regulation about something which is not European, is mainly American or Chinese. So what is the extent to which the European Commission can send someone to inspect data in a big data depot in California? So clearly, we are talking about a political conflict of sovereignty in this regard, and this is a major limitation of the European strategy in this sense. But there are also, when the ethical consideration become more important, think of genomic research or cloning or human cloning, we had also the possibility of political authorities saying you just cannot do that. You cannot do human cloning because of ethical consideration, first of all. While from a technological point of view, this can be rather easily feasible. So we have also to go back to a more fundamental set of challenges and values and priorities, because if you think ChatGPT, if I remember well, put the software in the market, within 5 days got 1 million downloads or something like that. And reaching 1 million users took Facebook several months, months to achieve that. So we are now in a situation where a very disruptive technology, which changes the way each of us works or carries out important activities, is not left in the domain of public decision, but is monopolized by an anonymous, unknown private agent. So these, in previous decades, with previous technologies, think of atomic energy, biotechnology, states would have created a committee of experts, policymakers would have reflected on what would be the regulation for introducing things like that. Now, this global scale, the lack of national political authority, and the fast pace of technological change means that we are just left to react to decision taken by private actors with a strong technological monopolistic power. Clearly, this, as many of you have said, is very hard to reconcile with democratic principles, with equality, and with also an economic structure which is not destroyed by an extreme concentration of power. I think we are lucky to address such interesting questions, and we are less lucky to be worried about the consequences. But we do hope that our collective brains may help guide the debate and the work and the policies in the future. Thank you very much, very much.